The town car smelled of lemon polish and imminent rain. I slid my phone back into my Birkin bag, the screen fading to black right after my final message went through. Taking off now. See you tomorrow. I had sent it to Leo. The lie sat like a smooth, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. Before we dive into what happened next, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. I love seeing how far these stories travel, so drop a comment down below and tell me what city or state you are watching from today. My pitch presentation down in Miami had wrapped up 3 full days ahead of schedule. The deal closed with a single handshake, locking in a 7-figure commission for Vance Capital Leo's firm, which was really our firm in every practical sense that mattered, except for whose last name was etched on the frosted glass door. I told my team I was hopping a red-eye to Street Barts for a mandatory disconnect. I told my husband I was stuck in endless, mind-numbing boardroom negotiations. The reality was very different. I had booked the first direct flight back to JFK. A sudden, visceral heaviness kept pressing against my chest, an instinct I couldn't rationally explain. Tonight was Eleanor's 70th birthday party. My mother-in-law was a woman who viewed my thriving career as a direct personal insult to her son's masculinity. It was the exact same party that, according to my official shared calendar, I was tragically fated to miss. A tiny, vindictive corner of my brain wanted to see the look on her tightly lifted Upper East Side face when I walked in, holding the classic Van Cleef and Arpels Alhambra bracelet it had taken me 2 months to track down. Yet there was another part of me larger, softer, the part I usually kept locked away in the same secure vault as my emotional vulnerability. That part just wanted to see Leo's face. I wanted to surprise him, feel his arms wrap around me after a brutal week apart, and whisper the news of the massive Miami closing in the quiet privacy of our bedroom. The heavy stone in my stomach warmed slightly at the thought. Maybe it was just sentimental nonsense. Maybe it was sheer exhaustion. Or perhaps some quiet, ever-vigilant alarm system. At the back of my mind, the same instinct that analyzed market trends and calculated risk assessment for a living was tripping a wire I had been too busy to notice. The 4-story limestone townhouse on East 74th Street was lit up like a luxury cruise liner. Warm golden light spilled out onto the sidewalk from every window. The smooth notes of a live jazz quartet and the sharp clinking of crystal glasses drifted out into the damp New York night. I tipped the driver generously, smoothed out the wrinkled sleeves of my tailored travel blazer from the row, and picked up my 2 gift bags. A large, iconic Tiffany blue box for Eleanor, and a sleek, charcoal gray one for Leo. Inside his bag sat custom-engraved onyx cufflinks stamped with his initials, featuring a tiny, hidden S on the inner post. More sentimentality. My secret smile felt delicate, almost fragile. I never used the formal front entrance for Eleanor's soirees. Her parties were an active minefield of relentless social climbers and old-money matriarchs who would audit my outfit, my posture, and even the vintage of my champagne before I could take 2 steps inside. The service entrance through the wrought iron garden gate and down the 3 stone steps into the kitchen was my secret passageway. Elena, the head household manager who had been working for the Vance family since before Leo was even born, would be down there. She would hand me a stiff drink and catch me up on the family gossip. The gourmet kitchen was a chaotic sanctuary of catering staff from St. Ambroise and steaming silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. Elena's eyes widened in sheer shock the second she saw me walk through the door. "Good Lord, Mrs. Vance! You're back early. Mr. Leo said you were stuck down in Florida until Sunday." "I got lucky," I replied, leaning down to plant a kiss on her flour-dusted cheek. Her usual warm smile felt uncharacteristically tight. Her gaze kept sliding away from mine, refusing to make eye contact. A cold, prickling sensation crept down the back of my neck. "Is everything all right, Elena?" "Yes, of course, everything is fine," she answered way too quickly, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. "It's just a very large crowd tonight, very loud." Her eyes darted toward the swinging wooden doors that led directly into the main dining room. "Maybe you'd like to head upstairs to the library and freshen up first?" The internal alarm in my head began ringing at deafening volume. "I'm completely fine," I said, my voice dropping an octave colder than I intended. I set the 2 gift bags down on a clear patch of marble countertop. "Is he in the living room?" Before Elena could stammer out an answer, a familiar laugh boomed through the background noise of the kitchen. It was Leo's laugh, but it sounded completely different, looser, louder, carried by that swaggering, performative tone he usually reserved for high-stakes investor dinners when he was overplaying a weak hand. My feet moved entirely on their own, carrying me straight toward the circular porthole window of the swinging kitchen door. The formal living room was packed shoulder to shoulder, a glittering swarm of Eleanor's Manhattan elite. And right there, standing front and center beneath the massive Baccarat crystal chandelier, was my husband. His hand wasn't wrapped around a tumbler of bourbon the way I had pictured. Instead, his fingers were firmly intertwined with the delicate, tanned hand of Chloe Bennett. All the air left my lungs in a single, silent rush. Chloe. His college sweetheart from Brown University. The woman who, during rare moments of brutal honesty early in our marriage, he had described as a breathtaking disaster. The free-spirited artist who had packed up and moved out to Los Angeles a full decade ago was suddenly back. Her honey blonde hair cascaded down her shoulders in effortless beach waves. Her scarlet silk dress was a striking slash of color against the sea of muted beige and black designer gowns filling the room. She laughed at something Eleanor had just whispered, tilting her head in a gesture that managed to be both coy and fiercely possessive. I stood completely paralyzed, a ghost peering through the door. The heavy stone in my stomach instantly turned to ice, and then to a burning coal. I watched with clinical detachment as my mother-in-law reached out and gently cupped Chloe's cheek. Eleanor's face was a glowing mask of absolute maternal approval. Even through the hum of the crowd, I could read her lips easily, so much brighter than that workaholic wife. Then, Leo raised his free hand to silence the room. He held up a champagne flute, wearing that polished, earnest expression he always adopted before delivering a major corporate toast. "Everyone," he projected, his voice steady, confident, and thick with a palpable happiness that struck me like a physical blow to the ribs. "Thank you all for coming out tonight to celebrate my extraordinary mother." Applause rippled through the room. He flashed that effortless, charming grin that had once made my knees go weak. "But the single greatest gift I can give her tonight, the gift of genuine, lasting happiness, is sharing my own." He squeezed Chloe's hand tightly. She gazed up at him as if he had hung the stars in the sky himself. Many of you already remember Chloe from our old days back at Brown. Fate has a funny way of circling back and bringing the right people home to where they belong. He paused for dramatic effect. "Mom, friends, I want to formally introduce you all to my girlfriend, Chloe." Thunderous applause erupted instantly. Enthusiastic cheers rang out, alongside loud approving whistles from a few of his old fraternity brothers. Eleanor beamed with sheer delight, wrapping an arm around Chloe's bare shoulders. "My brand new daughter," Eleanor cooed loudly. The crowd raised their glasses in celebration. "My girlfriend." The words bounced around inside the hollow cavern of my chest. I looked down at my left hand. The emerald-cut diamond ring, hand-picked by his late grandmother, suddenly looked grotesque like a piece of cheap costume jewelry. My mind flashed back to the loving text message I had just sent from the back of the Escalade. I thought about all the lonely nights spent in sterile hotel rooms across the country. I thought about the endless weekends I had spent scrutinizing his family firm's tax returns, uncovering legal deductions that had saved them tens of millions of dollars. I thought about the bullet I had physically taken for him, the jagged 6-inch scar running across my ribs that served as a permanent, silent reminder of my devotion. For this, an eerie, unnatural calm suddenly washed over me. It wasn't acceptance or despair. It was the freezing, razor-sharp silence that falls right before an apex predator strikes. The compartment of my brain that engineered hostile corporate takeovers and navigated cutthroat boardrooms roared to life. It took the shattered, weeping version of Serafina Vance and locked her away inside a soundproof mental bunker. Evaluate, adapt, execute. My hands stopped shaking entirely. I pushed open the heavy wooden kitchen door. The roaring wall of sound hit me first, followed by the heavy scent of expensive perfumes and warm canapes. I didn't simply walk into the room. I glided. A decade of commanding high-stakes corporate rooms took the wheel. My posture straightened to absolute perfection, my face settling into an expressionless, polite mask. I slipped along the outer perimeter of the crowd, an invisible shadow dressed in dark travel clothes. I reached the exact dead center of the room just as the enthusiastic applause began to die down. Leo leaned down to press a kiss against Chloe's lips, a triumphant, public display of ownership. I stopped dead in my tracks. I rested my designer handbag on a polished Chippendale side table, and then, slowly, deliberately, I began to clap. The sound was sharp, solitary, and rhythmic, a slow, echoing beat that instantly sliced right through the ambient chatter. Clap, 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 clap. Heads turned toward me one by one. First came polite, confused smiles, followed by instant recognition, and finally, dawning horror. A dead silence radiated outward from where I stood, spreading across the room like a shockwave. I kept clapping, my gaze fixed squarely on my husband. Leo pulled back from Chloe, a brief flicker of annoyance crossing his face at the sudden interruption. He followed the direction of the crowd's staring eyes. When his gaze finally locked onto mine, every drop of blood drained from his face. It happened instantly, a violent, sickly gray blanching. The charismatic master of ceremonies vanished on the spot, replaced by a terrified little boy caught red-handed with his hand inside the cookie jar. The crystal champagne flute slipped right out of his numb fingers, shattering against the antique parquet flooring in a violent explosion of glass and fizzing liquid. The sound popped like a gunshot in the dead silence. "Surprise, honey," I projected, my voice crystal clear and freezing cold, carrying effortlessly across the quiet room. "I am so sorry to interrupt your little performance." I let my hands drop casually to my sides. The spell broke completely. A chaotic wave of shocked gasps and frantic whispering exploded across the room. Chloe's perfectly glossed mouth fell open in a tiny circle of confusion. Eleanor looked as though she had just swallowed a live wasp. Her previous radiant joy evaporated into pure, unfiltered panic. I didn't spare either of them a second glance. My eyes remained locked exclusively on Leo. I flashed him a pleasant, hollow smile, the exact professional smirk you offer an unbearable colleague at a mandatory corporate mixer. Then, I turned on my heel and began walking slowly toward the grand marble foyer. My heels clicked with a steady, unhurried cadence against the stone floor. Serafina, his voice, cracked and raw with terror, cut through the buzzing room. I heard his frantic footsteps rushing behind me, accompanied by the wet, squishing sound of his dress shoes slipping through the puddle of spilled champagne. A heavy, sweaty hand clamped down around my wrist with desperate force. I paused. I looked down at his gripping hand, and then slowly tilted my gaze up to his face. His expression was an absolute masterpiece of sheer terror, suffocating guilt, and pathetic, begging hope. "Sarah, please. Oh my God, you have to let me explain." I didn't yank my arm away in a rage. I simply executed a clean, precise, joint manipulation twist with my wrist, a self-defense technique from a Krav Maga course he had personally insisted I take years ago. His grip broke instantly with effortless ease. I leaned in close to him, just near enough to smell the stale champagne on his breath and the expensive cologne I had personally bought him for Christmas. "Do not touch me," I murmured. The words were softly spoken, an icy whisper intended for his ears alone. "The formal divorce filings will be delivered to your office desk at exactly 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. My litigation counsel will be in touch. I strongly advise you to hire one, a very good one." I turned to walk out the door, then paused as if remembering a minor, trivial detail. "Oh, and Leo? That little off-the-books venture of yours? Siphoning $40,000 out of our joint savings account to quietly cover the seed capital for CB Galleries?" I watched the remaining color drain from his face all over again. It was thoroughly satisfying. My forensic accountant found the paper trail absolutely fascinating, and my attorney finds it highly relevant. I let a brief beat of silence pass. "Enjoy the rest of the party. Give my warmest regards to your brand new girlfriend." I didn't wait around for a response. I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped out into the crisp, rain-washed air of the Upper East Side. The door clicked firmly shut behind me, muting the escalating, scandalous uproar erupting inside the townhouse. I didn't hail a taxi. I just walked. The initial shockwave was already beginning to dissipate, replaced not by overwhelming grief, but by a hyper-aware, crystalline clarity. Every scattered puzzle piece suddenly snapped into place. The frequent solo business trips out to Los Angeles. The sudden password changes on his personal MacBook. The way his entire body had stiffened up last month when I casually brought up an old mutual acquaintance from Brown. It was all so painfully obvious, so overwhelmingly cliché. A wave of profound disgust washed over me, disgust for him, and disgust for myself for missing the warning signs. The deep heartbreak would inevitably come later. That was a distant, subterranean tremor rolling beneath the surface. I knew the seismic impact of this betrayal, the total collapse of a 10-year marriage, would eventually demand to be felt. But right now, an entirely different engine was firing on all cylinders inside me. Cold, clinical, and relentless. I pulled out my phone. Not to cry, and not to vent to a girlfriend. I scrolled directly to my contacts list and tapped the private cell number of the most ruthless, highly discreet, matrimonial litigator on the entire eastern seaboard. Then, I opened my rideshare app. I didn't select our residential address in Nolita. I pinned my destination as the Peninsula Hotel on Fifth Avenue. As the tinted black SUV pulled up to the curb beside me, I glanced back down the block toward the brightly lit limestone townhouse. The celebration was thoroughly ruined. His mother's milestone birthday, his grand romantic debut, his carefully constructed double life, all of it completely detonated in a matter of seconds. A razor-thin smile brushed across my lips. This wasn't the final chapter of my story. It was just the prologue. The marble lobby of the peninsula was a sanctuary of hushed whispers, soft ambient lighting, and polished brass fixtures. My reflection, captured in the elevator doors, stared back at me like a complete stranger. A woman in a slightly wrinkled travel blazer, her shoulders pinned back with unnatural posture, her expression set into a serene, blank canvas. The elevator attendant, a crisp young man in a tailored uniform, offered a polite nod. "Good evening, ma'am." His eyes politely avoided auditing my somewhat disheveled appearance. I gave him a phantom smile. "Good evening. My husband just publicly announced to a room full of people that another woman is his girlfriend at his mother's birthday party. I felt you should know." The corner suite on the top floor was exactly what I requested. Expansive, dead silent, and offering sweeping panoramic views of the dark, glittering canyons of Fifth Avenue. It was deeply luxurious and completely impersonal, a blank slate. I dropped my Birkin onto the marble entry console, the heavy thud echoing sharply across the quiet room. I left the overhead lights switched off and walked straight over to the wet bar. I poured 2 fingers of neat Macallan scotch into a heavy crystal tumbler and threw it back in a single swallow. The burning warmth hitting my throat was a welcome shock. A small, controlled fire mirroring the cold rage building inside my chest. I pressed my forehead directly against the chilled glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. The heavy armor I had worn back at the townhouse finally started to crack along the edges. In the dead silence of the suite, intrusive flashes assaulted my mind. Leo's pale, terrified face, Chloe's triumphant posture in her scarlet silk gown, Eleanor's beaming look of maternal pride, the wet, desperate feel of Leo's hand clamping around my wrist. My girlfriend. A raw, guttural sob fought its way up my throat. I swallowed it down forcefully, digging my manicured nails deep into the palms of my hands. No, I would not break. Not here. Not tonight. Breaking down was for victims, and I was nobody's victim. I was a senior managing partner at Sterling West Private Equity. I was the woman who had negotiated a 9-figure corporate acquisition while heavily medicated on prescription painkillers just days after taking a gunshot wound. I was Serafina Vance, and I had just been handed the most aggressive, hostile takeover offer of my entire life, my own existence. The analytical, corporate half of my brain, that cold, calculating engine, roared back to life. Emotion is simply raw data. Betrayal is actionable intelligence. Grief is a liability on the balance sheet. I process the data, analyze the intelligence, and immediately liquidate the liability. It was exactly 11:17 p.m. I picked up the bedside hotel phone. "This is Serafina Vance in Suite 3201. I need a private boardroom setup arranged in this suite by exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, fully equipped with secure, high-definition video conferencing capabilities. Make sure there are fresh pots of dark roast coffee, assorted pastries, and a dedicated, encrypted, high-speed Wi-Fi network. Charge every penny of it directly to the room folio. Right away, Mrs. Vance. Can I get you anything else tonight? A pot of boiling hot black tea. Send it up immediately, please." While waiting for room service, I flipped open my personal MacBook Pro, the only machine in my possession that Leo had never managed to get the passcode for. I bypassed folders labeled Portfolio Holdings and Q3 Market Projections, scrolling down to a deeply buried, password-protected directory labeled simply L. Inside sat subfolders: joint tax returns, property deeds, shareholder equity agreements for Vance Capital, and a more recently created folder marked Anomalies. I clicked it open. It was packed with digitized PDFs, scanned bank statements, and annotated wire transfer receipts. For the past 8 months, a quiet, persistent irritation had been itching at the back of my mind. $20,000 missing here. An unexplained $50,000 consulting fee drafted over there. Every single transaction originated from our primary joint checking account, the account set aside for household operations, property taxes, and luxury vacations, which was funded almost exclusively by my private equity bonuses. Whenever I questioned him, Leo's explanations were masterclasses in smooth, subtle gaslighting. "Honey, that wire covered the emergency plumbing overhaul out at the Southampton property. Remember the pipe burst in the guest cottage? Or that was the final retainer payment for the interior architect redesigning the Nolita loft. You signed off on that last month. I had been overwhelmed with back-to-back deal closings, completely distracted. I let it slide. But 3 months ago, that mild irritation had erupted into a full-blown red flag. A direct wire transfer of $240,000 sent straight to a mysterious Delaware entity named CB Holdings LLC. I had confronted him directly. He had sighed, running a hand through his hair in that self-deprecating way he knew always softened my defenses. Sierra, it's just a seed investment. A friend of a mutual contact is securing prime gallery space in Chelsea. It's an absolute steal. I'm backing it with some venture capital from the firm. It's nothing to worry about. It wasn't nothing. It was Chloe Bennett. The very next morning, I retained a highly discreet corporate investigator. His completed dossier sat right inside the folder. High-resolution surveillance photos showed Leo and Chloe looking cozy and intimate at beachfront restaurants out in the Hamptons. Commercial lease agreements for prime ground-floor retail space at 455 West, 22nd Street in Chelsea, signed by Chloe Bennett, featuring a personal financial guarantor line bearing a clumsy, obviously forged attempt at my signature. Hard money bridge loan documents leveraging our Nolita penthouse as secondary collateral bearing yet another amateur forgery of my signature. The investigator's executive summary at the bottom of the page read, "Subject and Miss Bennett appear to be maintaining an ongoing romantic partnership, cohabitating during weekends and presenting publicly as a couple in social settings. The art gallery is slated for a hard launch in 6 weeks. I had received that completed dossier 2 weeks ago, and I had frozen completely solid. Hope, outright denial, and the deeply humiliating fear that I had somehow misconstrued the facts kept me paralyzed. That very evening, I cooked his favorite meal from scratch. He strolled in 3 hours late, smelling faintly of a floral perfume that certainly wasn't mine. "Client dinner ran over at the steakhouse," he murmured, pressing an absent-minded kiss to my forehead. I smiled warmly and told him it was no problem at all. Room service arrived with my tea. I poured a fresh cup, allowing the familiar ritual to steady my hands. Then, I opened my contacts list and began making calls. Not to crying friends, and not to my mother. I called my allies. The first call went to Rebecca Stein. It was well past midnight, but she picked up on the second ring. Serafina. Her voice was razor-sharp and fully alert, completely devoid of sleep. Rebecca didn't do pleasantries. "It's late. This isn't a social call." "No, Rebecca. It isn't. I need you on full activation. Talk to me." Leo. Long-term infidelity. Financial fraud. Forgery of my signature on loan guarantees. Substantial capital figures involved. A brief silence hung on the line, followed by the distinct sound of a pen clicking open. "Give me the specifics." I gave her a concise, high-level debriefing. The surprise party debut. The public girlfriend announcement. The missing $250,000. The forged real estate guarantees. The Chelsea Gallery lease. And the investigator's complete evidentiary binder. "Where are you right now?" "The Peninsula." "Good. Stay put. Do not return to the apartment, and do not engage in direct communication with him under any circumstances. I'll be sitting in your suite by 7:30 tomorrow morning with draft pleadings. We are going to file an emergency ex parte motion for a temporary restraining order, freezing every single joint financial account and locking down his personal lines of credit. Forgery and wire fraud across state lines are severe felonies in New York. We have him completely cornered." A dark, icy surge of satisfaction warmed the freeze inside my veins. "I don't just want him cornered, Rebecca. I want him to personally hand me the scalpel." "Explain what you mean. Freezing accounts right out of the gate is purely reactive. I want to play offense. Right now, he expects me to react like a stereotypical betrayed wife. He thinks I'm going to have an emotional meltdown, scream, cry, or beg for answers. I want him to feel secure. I want him overconfident." Silence stretched over the phone. "You want him to keep digging his own grave. I want him to push ahead and open that Chelsea gallery. I want him to pump even more capital into it and complete the entire fraudulent transaction cycle. I want the SEC and the U.S. Attorney's Office taking a personal interest in his balance sheets, not just a Manhattan family court judge." A low, appreciative hum resonated through the receiver. "You are a genuinely dangerous woman, Serafina Vance. Bring a top-tier forensic accountant with you at 8. My next call went to Andrew West, my equity partner, my closest mentor, and the only person outside of Rebecca who knew the real story behind the gunshot wound I had taken for Leo 3 years ago. He answered with a gravelly, sleep-heavy voice. Sarah, everything okay? No. My voice cracked slightly on that single syllable. I forced myself to swallow hard, reinforcing the steel in my throat. Leo has been carrying on a full-blown affair with Chloe Bennett. Tonight, he introduced her to 50 people at Eleanor's birthday party as his live-in girlfriend. I was standing in the doorway. Jesus Christ. I heard the immediate rustle of bedsheets and the sharp click of a bedside lamp turning on. Where are you right now? Are you safe? I'm at the peninsula. I'm completely safe. Rebecca Stein is already retained and moving. Good. Do you want me to come over right now? Do you need, I don't know, room service ice cream and terrible reality TV? That sudden, genuine offer of uncomplicated kindness almost unraveled my composure. A burning pressure swelled behind my eyes. I squeezed them shut. I need your other skill set right now, Andrew. The one that makes junior Wall Street analysts break out in cold sweats. His tone shifted instantly. Every trace of sleep vanished from his voice. All right, tell me the target. Leo has been systematically draining our joint capital at least $250,000 to fund a private art gallery for her. He forged my signature on secondary commercial bridge loans to leverage the real estate. That is textbook federal wire fraud. The absolute moron, Andrew muttered darkly. What's the play? Vance Capital is severely overleveraged. You know it, and I know it. Leo spent the last 24 months making catastrophic bets on speculative biotech stocks. The sole reason his doors are still open is because of the foundational institutional clients I personally brought over, and the tax shelter structures I designed for him. He is personally leveraged up to his eyeballs just to meet his monthly margin calls. I could practically hear the gears turning in Andrew's sharp, analytical brain as he connected the dots. You want to spook his institutional investors. I want you to help me plant the narrative that Vance Capital is facing an aggressive, hostile corporate acquisition. Leak targeted rumors to the right managing directors across town. Make him panic about losing control of his crown jewel. When he panics, he gets reckless. He'll make sloppy operational errors. He might even try to move more illicit capital to cover his margins, and Rebecca's forensic team will be capturing every keystroke. Andrew let out a long, low whistle. You want to trigger a full-scale liquidity run on his firm while simultaneously liquidating his marriage? That is positively Machiavellian. He paused for a beat. I absolutely love it. Consider it done. I'll drop a few carefully worded comments over lunch at the grill tomorrow noon. Thank you, Andrew. Serafina? His tone softened. For whatever it's worth. He is the single biggest idiot in the 5 boroughs. Try to get 2 hours of sleep. We go to war at dawn. Sleep was a physical impossibility. I spent the remaining hours of the night systematically organizing digital archives, constructing a detailed chronological spreadsheet of every fraudulent transfer, and compiling a clean evidentiary dossier for Rebecca's team. When the first pale, gray light of dawn began filtering over the Manhattan skyline, I took a steaming shower. I stepped into a crisp, tailored black trousers suit and high heels that I always kept stashed in my office emergency bag for unexpected board meetings. I pulled my damp hair back into a severe, polished low bun and applied minimalist, armor-like makeup. At exactly 7:28 a.m., Rebecca arrived at the suite door. Flanking her was a sharp-eyed, wiry man introduced as Mark, a senior forensic accounting partner. Rebecca, dressed impeccably in a structured navy Armani suit with a razor-sharp bob, looked as though she had been awake and strategizing for days. She surveyed my setup, the laptops running, the printed spreadsheets neatly arrayed across the mahogany dining table, and gave a sharp nod of professional approval. Are you ready to begin? We went straight to work. I walked them through every line item. Mark's fingers flew furiously across his keyboard, his eyes gleaming behind his wire-rimmed glasses as he traced the digital routing numbers. This paper trail is breathtaking, Mark murmured, his tone bordering on professional awe. He didn't even attempt to layer the shell accounts effectively. The signature forgeries on the commercial guarantees are laughable amateur hours. The wire transfers move directly from your primary domestic joint checking account into a pass-through LLC, and then straight into the operating checking account of the Chelsea Art Gallery. This is an assistant U.S. attorney's absolute dream scenario, and a matrimonial judge's slam dunk. We can utterly dismantle him, Rebecca interjected, flashing a predatory shark smile. We file for divorce citing proven adultery and cruel and inhuman treatment. The documented financial fraud gives us maximum leverage for a severely disproportionate distribution of marital assets. We petition for sole ownership of the Nolita penthouse, the Southampton Beach estate, and 80% of all liquid marital accounts. He'll be extremely lucky if he gets to walk away with his gym clothes. I sipped my lukewarm tea, listening intently. Their proposed strategy was flawless, brutal, and highly efficient. It would leave him publicly disgraced, professionally ruined, and financially crippled. It was exactly what he deserved. And yet, no, I said softly. Both of them stopped typing and looked up at me in shock. No? Rebecca arched a sharp eyebrow. Serafina, this is an airtight, guaranteed victory. We have him dead to rights. I don't want to win just yet, I replied. My voice dead calm. Freeze the secondary discretionary accounts, yes. File the initial divorce summons, yes. But I want all allegations of financial fraud and criminal forgery held completely in reserve for now. Mark blinked in confusion. Rebecca narrowed her eyes, instantly calculating my angle. You're holding back the kill shot. I am setting a trap. I want him to know that I am fully aware of the infidelity, but I want him to believe I am far too emotionally devastated, embarrassed, and proud to drag the authorities into our financial laundry. I want him thinking I just want a fast, quiet, clean break. I paused, meeting Rebecca's gaze. He is profoundly arrogant. He will assume he outsmarted me. He will get sloppy. He might even attempt to rapidly liquidate additional firm assets to finalize the gallery renovation before the divorce goes through, which hands us even more irreversible leverage. You want to give him just enough rope to hang himself on a public scaffold, Rebecca noted. I want him to personally hand me the noose, I corrected. And I want that Chelsea gallery of Chloe Bennett's to open on schedule. I want the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the flowing champagne, and the society press coverage. And when she is standing right there, fulfilling her lifelong dream funded entirely by my stolen earnings, I want the entire world to learn the exact mechanical breakdown of how she paid for it. A long, heavy silence enveloped the suite dining room. Mark stared at me with a potent mixture of deep respect and genuine fear. Rebecca's trademark shark grin slowly returned, broader and much more genuine this time. Now that is clean, elegant warfare, she nodded, instantly shifting back into execution mode. Understood. We serve the initial divorce summons claiming standard irreconcilable differences. We place a temporary administrative freeze on the primary joint accounts. We transmit a formal legal letter noting minor accounting discrepancies in shared capital, demanding a standard routine audit. That will make him nervous enough to scramble, but not terrified enough to hire a white-collar criminal defense team. He'll treat it like a standard aggressive negotiation tactic. Precisely, I said. My personal cell phone buzzed loudly against the glass tabletop. Leo. His name flashed brightly across the display, accompanied by a glowing digital photo of him laughing on a private sailboat during our anniversary trip to Sardinia last summer. I felt zero emotional pangs, no nostalgia, no sorrow. Just a clean, sterile void. I let it ring until it rolled to voicemail. 2 seconds later, it buzzed again, and again, and again. Then, the text messages began pouring in rapid succession. Leo. Sarah, please, we need to talk right now. Leo. You don't understand the full picture. It isn't what it looks like. Leo. She doesn't mean anything to me. It was a massive, stupid mistake. Leo. Where are you? The Nolita apartment is empty. Leo. Pick up your phone. This is spiraling out of control. I reached out to pick up the device. Rebecca immediately laid a firm, restraining hand over my forearm. Serafina, don't. Anything you put in writing right now can and will be dissected in a deposition. I am fully aware. I typed out a single, precisely worded response. All future communications regarding our marital estate must be directed exclusively through my legal counsel, Rebecca Stein. Her office contact information will be formally transmitted to you today. Do not attempt to contact me directly again. I hit send. The phone stopped vibrating. The silence returned, absolute and heavy. Then, the very next alert came from an entirely unexpected sender. A new message notification popped up not from Leo, but from Chloe Bennett. Chloe, I know this is extremely painful for you right now, but you need to accept the reality of the situation. Leo hasn't loved you for years. Handle this with basic dignity and walk away gracefully. Don't embarrass yourself any further. I stared down at the screen, genuinely marveling at the sheer, breathtaking audacity, the cold, condescending tone. Handle this with basic dignity. My fingers didn't shake as I hovered over the keyboard. I didn't threaten her, and I didn't throw insults. I simply relayed actionable data. Serafina. Chloe, the commercial lease agreement for your retail space at 455 West 22nd Street expires in exactly 37 days. Your commercial landlord, Hudson Properties LLC, executed a full asset sale of the building at 8 o'clock this morning to a private holding company under my direct ownership. The new management group is actively reviewing all tenant leases for immediate restructuring or termination. If I were you, I would begin packing the packing crates. And pass along my regards to Leo. I am sure you two have plenty to discuss, such as multi-count federal wire fraud. I tapped send. 3 pulsing gray dots appeared on the screen as she began to type back. They danced frantically for 5 seconds, then vanished completely. There was no reply. A sharp, razor-thin smile, the first genuine smile I had worn in 12 hours, curved across my lips. It felt incredibly grounding. Let's get to work, I said, flipping the phone face down onto the mahogany table. We have an immense amount of ground to cover. The war room was fully operational. The clean execution had officially begun. And for the first time since walking into that Upper East Side townhouse, I felt something far more invigorating than grief. I felt the steady, silent thrill of the hunt. The process server was a no-nonsense woman in her early 50s wearing comfortable walking shoes and carrying a thick manila envelope. She personally served Leo right on the sidewalk as he walked out of a high-power client lunch at Cipriani Wall Street. I know the exact details because my private investigator, a specialized operative, transmitted a secure drop of time-stamped digital surveillance photographs straight to my laptop. The sequence unfolded like a frame-by-frame piece of corporate performance art. Leo smiling confidently while shaking hands with the managing director, his smile abruptly dying as the woman stepped into his path. Confusion giving way to dawning shock. Him snatching the envelope, ripping it open right on the bustling financial district sidewalk, his eyes scanning the cover page. The healthy color drained completely from his face. His client's expression shifted rapidly from polite confusion to severe professional discomfort, before quickly excusing himself to jump into a waiting taxi. Leo was left standing entirely alone in the middle of the crowded pedestrian thoroughfare, loose legal pages flapping wildly in the wind as he frantically dialed his cell phone. My device remained dead silent. He had finally digested my directive. All communication goes through legal counsel. Instead, my phone rang with a call from Rebecca. Service of process executed cleanly, she announced, satisfaction practically dripping from her voice. His reaction was thoroughly theatrical. According to my sources, he is currently sitting in the back of his town car, hyperventilating. He just retained Marty Bronsky. Marty Bronsky, a notorious pitbull Manhattan matrimonial attorney, known for wearing $5,000 suits and deploying scorched earth litigation tactics to defend wealthy husbands. Leo had called in the heavy artillery. That meant he was terrified. Bronsky will be on my direct line within the hour, Rebecca continued. He'll attempt to bluster, threaten countersuits, and paint you as an unstable, money-grabbing harpy. It's his standard playbook. Are you braced? I surveyed my surroundings. The sun-drenched, 3,000-square-foot Soho loft I had leased on a 6-month contract that very morning. Minimalist clean lines, floor-to-ceiling industrial windows, completely devoid of clutter or emotional baggage, a clean slate, or a fortified concrete bunker. I have been braced for this for over 3 years, Rebecca. I just didn't realize it until last night. Bronsky's call came through 53 minutes later. Rebecca patched me in via conference line, keeping her phone centered on the reclaimed wood table between us. Rebecca, Marty here. I assume this call is regarding the Vance matter. Bronsky's voice boomed through the speaker, raspy, aggressive, and engineered to intimidate. Let's skip the posturing and cut straight to the chase. Your client has completely lost her grip on reality, filing for divorce on grounds of open adultery and cruel treatment. This is a hysterical, vengeful fantasy. We are preparing to file an immediate countersuit for malicious defamation of character. If you push this, it's going to get extraordinarily ugly, and your client is going to walk away dragged through the Manhattan mud. I met Rebecca's eyes across the desk. She didn't blink once. My client's mental clarity is absolute, Marty, Rebecca replied in an effortless, glacial tone. And her claims are fully substantiated by a certified forensic accounting team, alongside a sworn evidentiary affidavit from a licensed private investigator containing extensive photographic and financial documentation of your client's ongoing extramarital affair, including his public declaration, introducing The co-respondent as his romantic partner before 50. Eyewitnesses 48 hours ago. She let that hang. As for things getting ugly, Marty, you haven't even seen the opening overture. Dead silence greeted us over the speakerphone. We could practically hear the gears screeching inside Bronsky's head as he rapidly reassessed the battlefield. He had charged in expecting a standard emotional negotiation. He was realizing he had stepped onto a live minefield. What exactly is your client demanding? His voice returned significantly lower, stripped of its theatrical bluster. Our foundational terms are outlined in the formal pleadings. We are seeking an immediate, disproportionate division of the marital estate based upon documented, severe fiduciary misconduct involving marital assets. We are prepared to initiate settlement discussions from that framework. Rebecca leaned closer to the receiver, her tone turning lethal. But hear me clearly, Marty. Advise your client that if he attempts to contact my client directly or deploys third-party harassment tactics, our next direct correspondence will be with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. There will be no further courtesies extended. Are we perfectly understood? Another long, heavy pause. I will confer with my client. The line clicked dead. Rebecca smirked, leaning back in her chair. He is in absolute panic mode. He had zero knowledge of the fraudulent wire transfers. Leo kept his legal counsel completely in the dark. Classic hubris. The next tactical escalation arrived much faster than anticipated. Late that afternoon, while I was reviewing an early-stage investment prospectus for Andrew's new venture capital fund, the loft intercom buzzed sharply. The building concierge's voice sounded tight and stressed. Miss Vance? There is a Mr. Vance down in the lobby. He is acting extremely agitated and insisting on immediate access. I hadn't shared my temporary address with anyone outside of my legal team. He had obviously hired a private investigator to track my car service from the hotel. A sharp spike of cold rage pulsed through my veins. Send him up, Carlos. It's completely fine. I didn't bother standing up. I remained seated calmly at the head of the conference table. The investment prospectus open in front of me. I listened to the hum of the freight elevator, followed by heavy, erratic footsteps pounding down the corridor. The door was unlocked. It flew open with violent force. Leo looked as though he had been dragged backwards through a hurricane. His silk tie was wrenched loose around his collar, his designer suit jacket crumpled, his hair wild, and his eyes bloodshot and dark with sleep deprivation. Every trace of the polished Wall Street financier had been stripped away, exposing the arrogant, terrified boy, simmering underneath. He surveyed the expansive, empty loft, his eyes locking onto my calm posture, and his face contorted with dark fury. "What the hell is this, Serafina?" he roared, slamming the heavy loft door shut behind him. The echo reverberated off the exposed brick walls. "You set a trap for me. This entire setup was a premeditated ambush." I slowly placed my Mont Blanc pen down on the table. "An ambush, Leo? You stood in front of 50 society guests and introduced your mistress as your live-in girlfriend. The ambush was entirely self-inflicted. You know exactly what I'm talking about." He charged across the polished concrete floor, stabbing a finger toward the stacked legal folders on my desk. The allegations of fiduciary fraud, the forensic accountants. You've been sitting back planning this for months. What are you trying to do? Utterly destroy me? Steal my firm right out from under me? I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, studying him with clinical detachment. There it was, the fundamental core of who Leonardo Vance truly was. An extraordinarily fragile ego supported by a decade of my intellectual heavy lifting. He literally couldn't process the concept of accountability. In his distorted worldview, this wasn't the natural consequence of his betrayal. It was an unprovoked coup against his personal empire. Your firm? My voice dropped to a lethal, quiet register. Vance Capital was standing on the brink of insolvency 24 months ago. Your grand strategic vision consisted of dumping millions into overhyped, speculative biotech stocks. The core institutional accounts that kept your lights turning on Kensington Holdings, the Palatine Group, were my relationships. My corporate connections. The sophisticated offshore tax structures that kept the IRS from auditing you into oblivion were designed by me. I stood up slowly, stepping around the table toward him. You didn't want a full corporate partner, Leo. You wanted a brilliant ghostwriter to crunch your numbers, warm your bed, and stand silently on your arm at charity galas to make you look formidable. And the second my personal success eclipsed yours, the second I became too visible, too independent, you felt threatened. So you ran right back to Chloe Bennett. She gazes up at you with those empty, worshipping eyes, and makes you feel like the master of the universe all over again. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over him from head to toe. King of a very tiny, pathetic little anthill, he flinched physically, as if I had struck him across the face with a riding crop. The objective truth was a weapon he had zero defensive shields against. "You," he spat, his voice shaking with impotent rage. "You cold, calculating corporate robot. You never loved me for a second. You only loved the social access and the Vance family name." I stopped 3 feet from him, making sure he could see the absolute, bottomless contempt burning inside my eyes. "I loved you," I said softly, the words drawn from a deep well I had assumed was completely dry. "I loved you when you were a reckless junior vice president with far more ambition than common sense. I loved you enough to physically step in front of a deadly weapon for you." I reached up and tapped my fingertips against the fabric of my silk blouse, right over my ribcage. "This scar wasn't for social access, Leo. It was for you, and you weaponized that devotion into a perceived weakness. You played me for an absolute fool." For a fleeting microsecond, something cracked in his eyes. It wasn't genuine remorse. It was deep, suffocating shame. But it vanished almost instantly, swallowed up by defensive rage. "So this is your grand revenge arc? Bankrupting me? Leaving me with nothing? I am not taking a single dollar that doesn't rightfully belong to me, or that you didn't attempt to steal from our joint equity first." I walked calmly over to the side console and picked up a slim, bound legal folder, holding it out toward his chest. "This is a comprehensive property settlement agreement. Sign it. You retain a 30% non-voting equity interest in Vance Capital. I take sole ownership of the Nolita penthouse, the Southampton property, and 70% of all liquid marital funds. It is an extraordinarily generous offer." I held his gaze without blinking, especially considering that I could easily bury you in federal litigation and hand the SEC enough actionable intelligence to ensure you spend the next decade learning what federal prison food tastes like. He snatched the folder out of my grip, his eyes scanning the summary page, his face flooded with dark, congested blood. "This is absolute extortion. This is highway robbery. I built that firm with my bare hands. You are standing on a house of cards constructed entirely out of my intellectual property, Leo, and I hold every single trump card in the deck." I stepped half a pace closer, lowering my voice to a near whisper. "Do you happen to recall the Delacroix Pharmaceuticals merger from 2 years ago? The miracle transaction that saved your fourth quarter balance sheet from complete collapse?" His eyes shot wide open. He remembered. "You were dead drunk. We were celebrating at the Oak Room. You bragged to me about the non-public clinical trial data passed along to you by your college fraternity brother working inside the FDA regulatory office. You assumed it was just pillow talk between spouses." I paused, watching his breathing turn shallow. I recognized it as insider trading. The heavy silence in the loft turned suffocating. I watched the last traces of color vanish from his cheeks. It was becoming a very familiar physical performance. "I have contemporaneous, dated handwritten journals detailing that conversation secured inside a private bank vault that my litigation counsel has immediate legal access to." I tilted my head slightly. "If this settlement agreement is not executed and returned to my attorney by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, those journals, accompanied by a forensic timeline of your trading executions, that exact week will be delivered via courier to the SEC Enforcement Division." He stared at me, his mouth hanging slightly open. All the bluster, the righteous indignation, and the theatrical rage evaporated in a heartbeat, replaced by pure, paralyzing terror. This was the catastrophic contingency he had never factored into his calculations. Not just a messy divorce, not just society gossip, the absolute destruction of his professional license, his personal fortune, and very likely his physical freedom. You wouldn't actually do that," he stammered, his voice reduced to a dry croak. "You'd be legally implicated as well. You're my legal spouse." I am the responsible spouse who immediately reported her husband's ongoing criminal enterprises upon discovering the full scope of his activities, I replied smoothly. A terrified wife operating under the psychological control of a powerful Wall Street executive. I offered a small, dismissive shrug. The public sympathy narrative writes itself, especially with Chloe Bennett waiting in the wings to testify about your character. Who do you think a federal jury is going to believe? The successful, betrayed wife who took a bullet for her family, or the fraudulent financier and his, as the tabloids love to phrase it, gallery girl? The legal folder trembled visibly in his hands. He looked down at the documents, then back up at my face. I watched the exact moment his internal structural integrity completely collapsed. The aggressive tension drained out of his shoulders. He was no longer an adversary. He was simply a broken man standing in a half-empty loft, realizing he had gambled his entire existence on a bluff and lost everything. "You are a monster," he whispered lifelessly. It wasn't an insult. It was an acknowledgement of defeat. "No, Leo," I replied, turning my back on him to walk toward my desk chair. "I am simply the apex predator you personally manufactured." I gestured casually toward the exit. "Now leave my residence. Signed paperwork on Bronsky's desk by noon tomorrow. Or the bank vault opens. The choice is entirely yours." He stood frozen in place for several long seconds, resembling a shattered statue. Then, slowly, he turned around and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, a pathetic, quiet exit compared to his explosive entrance. The silence settling over the loft felt massive and expansive. I didn't move. I sat there waiting for the delayed emotional crash, the crushing sorrow of finally burying the man I had dedicated my 20s to. It didn't arrive. Instead, an all-consuming physical fatigue settled into my bones, accompanied by an icy, absolute certainty. I had decisively won the opening battle, but the overarching war was far from over. Right on cue, my iPhone screen lit up across the table. A direct text from Andrew. Rumors swirling across the street that Vance Capital is facing severe institutional liquidity issues. Leo is frantically calling every private equity connection in town, trying to quietly unload personal assets. The seed narrative we planted is growing exponentially. People are asking hard questions. I picked up the phone and typed back, "Good. Let the questions multiply. Have lunch at the grill tomorrow noon as planned. Be visible. Make sure your conversations carry to the adjacent tables. Andrew. Already reserved the center booth. You are scheduled as my guest of honor, the brilliant, newly single venture capitalist ready to launch her own fund. Wear something that communicates, I am operating at peak performance and you are irrelevant." A genuine, soft smile curved across my face. The next strategic move on the chessboard. A public display of authority, forward momentum, and unshakable alliance. Leo would hear about it before the appetizers hit the table, and it would systematically drive him out of his mind. I looked down at the draft prospectus for Phoenix Collective, my new early-stage investment vehicle designed to fund minority and female-led technology startups. A clean, fresh empire constructed directly over the smoldering ashes of the old one. I picked up my Montblanc pen. The heartbreak, the lingering grief, and the ghost of my marriage were irrelevant, shadows fading into the background. The only tangible reality left was the immense work sitting in front of me, and the cold, perfect arc of absolute justice I was actively drawing across the skyline. The formal invitation to the Museum of Modern Art Spring Gala arrived inside a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with the museum's iconic minimalist logo. It was addressed exclusively to me, Serafina Vance, not Mr. and Mrs. Leonardo Vance. It was either a subtle social snub or an explicit acknowledgement of the shifting power dynamics within Manhattan's cultural elite. High society scandal is a form of currency in New York, and my personal stock was currently trading at an all-time high. I knew skipping the event was out of the question. Retreating into shadows would be interpreted by the Upper East Side matriarchs as weakness or embarrassment. Attending solo, however, would send a clear, unequivocal message. Andrew called me on his private line the morning of the gala. "The social buzz surrounding tonight is deafening," he noted, amusement evident in his tone. "You are the primary exhibit. People are far more eager to see your entrance than the actual modern art installation." "Delightful," I dryly replied, inspecting my reflection in the full-length mirror of my dressing room. I had selected a bespoke, black-and-white tailored tuxedo suit, wide-leg trousers paired with a razor-sharp, satin-lapelled evening blazer. Beneath the blazer, I wore absolutely nothing except my bare skin and a structural, sheer black mesh bodysuit. It wasn't just formal wear. It was psychological armor. It explicitly communicated, I am not mourning. I am operating on offense. Leo confirmed his attendance with her, Andrew added, his tone dropping into a serious, protective register. He's desperately trying to project an image of stability and unity to contain the corporate fallout. A ripple of cold anticipation traced down my spine. Good. Let him try. The MoMA atrium was a glittering, sensory overload of designer evening gowns, bespoke tuxedos, and the relentless hum of high-net-worth networking echoing off the towering architectural glass walls. The air carried the heavy fragrance of Tom Ford perfume, expensive vintage champagne, and ruthless social ambition. When I made my entrance, walking arm in arm with Andrew, a calculated visual alignment of financial power, and unbothered moving on, a palpable hush rippled through the immediate vicinity of the doorway. Heads turned in unison. Dozens of eyes, some conveying polite sympathy, most burning with ravenous, voyeuristic curiosity, tracked our progress across the polished white floor. I felt their collective gaze like physical friction. They were auditing me for structural fractures, searching for puffy eyes or forced smiles that would indicate emotional collapse. Andrew gently squeezed my forearm. "Remember," he murmured under the cover of the ambient music, "you aren't the scandal. You are the executive who survived the explosion. Smile as if you hold insider information that makes them all look trivial." I did hold insider information. I smiled warmly, moving effortlessly through the crowd. I exchanged air kisses with museum board members, accepted delicate expressions of sympathy with graceful nods, and systematically deflected intrusive questions with polished corporate non-sequiturs. I was playing a precise role, the dignified, untouchable executive, moving forward with quiet grace. It was far more mentally exhausting than navigating a 12-hour corporate merger. Then, I spotted them. They were holding court near the center of the atrium beneath a massive Alexander Calder hanging mobile. Leo stood rigidly in a bespoke formal tuxedo, his posture tight and nervous, his smile thin and performative. Chloe stood beside him, looking radiantly conspicuous in a figure-hugging emerald silk gown, her arm looped possessively through his elbow. She was laughing much too loudly at a joke delivered by a senior museum benefactor, tossing her honey-blonde hair back in a desperate display of youthful, triumphant vitality. She caught sight of me before Leo did. Her loud laugh died instantly in her throat. Our eyes locked across the 30 feet of polished floor, and her expression contained zero guilt or embarrassment. It burned with pure, unadulterated territorial defiance. Leo tracked her line of sight, turning his head toward me. His entire physical frame stiffened. The polished facade he was desperately trying to project cracked wide open, exposing the panicked, haunted expression I had seen in my Soho loft. For several agonizing seconds, the three of us remained frozen in a silent visual triangle, separated by a chasm of broken vows and embezzled capital. I offered him the exact same cold, dismissive smirk I had just given a nosy society reporter, then turned my back on him entirely. I spent the next 45 minutes deliberately orbiting their location, maintaining polite distance while remaining constantly visible. I discussed a proposed venture capital acquisition fund with the museum's executive director. I listened attentively to a prominent sculptor break down his upcoming installation. I was present, vibrant, and thoroughly unbroken. The inevitable confrontation occurred near the main champagne bar, while Andrew and I were conversing with a managing director from a major sovereign wealth fund, a prime target investor for Phoenix Collective. I felt a sudden shift in air pressure beside me, accompanied by an overwhelming wave of floral perfume. "Serafina," Chloe purred, her tone dripping with saccharine, theatrical concern. "What an extraordinarily bold sartorial choice. A men's tuxedo suit. How avant-garde." I turned slowly to face her. Andrew and the Sovereign Wealth Fund director immediately ceased talking. Leo stood hovering 4 paces behind her shoulder, looking completely trapped and thoroughly miserable. "Chloe," I replied in a flat, neutral tone, as if acknowledging an slightly annoying intern in an elevator. "Emerald green. How remarkably literal of you." Her jaw tightened slightly around her practiced smile. "I just wanted to step over and tell you how deeply brave I think you are for showing your face publicly tonight, considering everything that has transpired." She made a vague, patronizing flutter with her hand. "It must be utterly humiliating knowing the entire city is discussing your personal life." "Discussing what, precisely?" I asked, taking a calm sip of sparkling water. "That my soon-to-be ex-husband is a documented serial adulterer and financial fraudster? Or that his new companion possesses the aesthetic restraint of a Las Vegas casino host?" An involuntary gasp escaped the Sovereign Wealth Fund director. Andrew covered his mouth with a fist to suppress a sharp laugh. Chloe's cheeks flushed dark crimson beneath her professional makeup. She took a half-step closer, lowering her voice into a venomous hiss. "You are deeply pathetic, clinging to the legal wreckage of a man who hasn't wanted to touch you in years. Everyone in this room is secretly laughing at you. I reserve my personal pity for individuals who attempt to construct a viable future using forged financial documents and someone else's husband." I replied with chilling equanimity. "By the way, how is the gallery renovation proceeding? Have you finalized your long-term commercial lease agreements yet?" Her composure shattered completely. Raw, violent fury ignited in her eyes. She had obviously read my text message. She knew with absolute certainty that I now held the deed to her commercial building. Her right hand, the one clutching a crystal goblet filled to the brim with heavy red Cabernet, began to tremble visibly. What happened next unfolded in surreal, cinematic slow motion. She executed a deliberate, clumsy stumble forward. Her wrist flicked outward. A heavy, dark red wave of Cabernet launched into the air, splashing directly across the pristine white front of my tailored silk blazer and soaking through the sheer mesh bodysuit beneath. A collective gasp rippled through the immediate crowd. Conversations ceased instantly for 20 feet in every direction. Every eye turned toward our circle. "Oh my God!" Chloe shrieked, delivering a theatrical, hand-to-mouth performance of horror. "I am so incredibly sorry. How completely clumsy of me." Her eyes, however, glittered with vindictive triumph. "Your gorgeous jacket is entirely ruined." The crimson stain spread rapidly across the white silk, dark, jagged, and impossible to ignore. Dead silence descended over the bar area. This was her primary objective, to publicly humiliate me, reducing the poised executive into a stained, chaotic spectacle. Leo stood frozen in complete shock. Andrew stepped forward, his jaw clenched in dark fury. "You did that entirely on purpose." I raised my left hand, cutting Andrew off mid-sentence. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind remained absolute ice. This was a critical public test. I looked down at the dark red stain spreading across my chest, then raised my eyes to lock onto Chloe's face. I didn't utter a single syllable. With deliberate, unhurried precision, I reached up and unbuttoned the single horn button of my tailored blazer. I slipped the ruined jacket off my shoulders and let it drop casually to the polished museum floor. I stood before the elite assembly, wearing only wide-leg trousers and the sheer, transparent black mesh bodysuit. And beneath the harsh, brilliant halogen gallery spotlights, my surgical scar was exposed to the entire room. It began just beneath my right collarbone, a thick, jagged, silvery line of raised tissue that cut diagonally across my ribcage down toward my sternum. It was severe, undeniable, and deeply violent, the unmistakable architectural remnant of severe physical trauma. The ambient silence in the atrium shifted instantly from voyeuristic amusement to profound, breathless shock. The smug, triumphant smirk on Chloe's face evaporated on the spot, replaced by confusion, and then dawning dread. Her calculated attempt to humiliate me had backfired catastrophically. I didn't cross my arms or attempt to shield my torso. I stood tall, my shoulders squared, keeping my eyes bored directly into hers. 3 years ago, I said, my tone clear and level, carrying effortlessly across the dead silent gallery floor. Leo and I were walking out of a charity dinner in Midtown. A desperate, drug-addled man attempted to rob us at knife point. I paused, allowing the gravity of the scene to settle into the room. Leo froze completely solid. I shifted my gaze slightly toward my husband. He stood paralyzed, his face completely drained of color, staring at the exposed scar on my chest as if seeing it for the very first time. The blade was thrust directly toward his throat, I continued. I stepped across his body and intercepted the weapon. Total, suffocating silence gripped the room. 6 inches of serrated steel into my pleural cavity. The emergency surgeons at New York Presbyterian stated I survived by a fraction of an inch. I shifted my eyes back to Chloe. For years, my husband referred to this scar as my badge of honor, the absolute physical proof of my take's loyalty, and what I would willingly sacrifice to protect our family. I reached down and gracefully scooped up the wine-soaked blazer from the floor, holding it casually at my side. Now, it is simply structural scar tissue. I raised my chin, my voice ringing with crystalline authority. A permanent, visual reminder that there are certain human beings on this earth who simply aren't worth bleeding for. I didn't look at another soul. I turned smoothly on my heel. Andrew, his face a complex portrait of protective fury and profound professional pride, shrugged off his own tuxedo jacket to drape over my shoulders. I shook my head gently, declining the cover. Let them look. Let them understand. I walked toward the grand exit of the museum, my head held high, the jagged scar catching the gallery lights with every step. The sea of Manhattan elite parted before me in dead silence. Not a single whisper was uttered until the massive glass exit doors swung shut behind us. The cool spring night air hit my bare skin, and instantly, a violent, uncontrollable tremor shook my entire body from the inside out. The adrenaline performance was officially concluded. The psychological armor had fallen away. The deepest vulnerability I had just weaponized to survive the room was now a raw, exposed wound. Andrew matched my stride on the sidewalk, immediately draping his heavy wool tuxedo jacket securely across my shivering shoulders. "Jesus Christ, Sarah," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you all right?" I couldn't form words. I simply shook my head from side to side. The hot, stinging tears I had aggressively suppressed inside the ballroom finally spilled over my lower lashes, cutting hot tracks down my cheeks. My iPhone began buzzing frantically inside my clutch bag, and again. And again. Push notifications lighting up the screen in rapid succession. Page 6. Scar tissue. Society wife's secret sacrifice exposed in dramatic MoMA gala showdown. New York Post. Wine and blood. Serafina Vance silences critics by revealing violent survival scar at high society soiree. The public narrative was permanently sealed. The media discourse was no longer focused on a cliché marital affair or corporate divorce. It was centered entirely on loyalty, profound sacrifice, and devastating betrayal. By 9 o'clock the following morning, while digital headlines dominated the news cycle and morning talk shows dissected the MoMA confrontation, my private cell phone rang. It displayed an incoming number I hadn't interacted with in weeks, Eleanor Vance. I let it ring 3 times before pressing answer. Eleanor. Her voice sounded thin, fractured, and completely stripped of its trademark patrician arrogance. It was the trembling voice of an elderly woman, suddenly confronting her own irrelevance. "Serafina, I saw the morning papers. I saw the photographs of that scar." She stopped to draw a ragged breath. "Leo told me it was from a skiing mishap out in Aspen. A reckless fall on an expert slope." I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Soho loft, holding a mug of black coffee, watching morning traffic flow down Broadway. I felt zero emotional resonance toward her, no anger, no vindication, just vast psychological distance. "Your son lies habitually, Eleanor. About skiing accidents, about financial transactions, and about his fundamental character." A heavy, wet sob echoed across the line. "I genuinely didn't know, Serafina. I swear to you on my family's name. I had no idea the physical severity, what you actually endured to save his life." Her voice cracked completely. "I have been an absolute fool. A bitter, petty, aging woman. I actively encouraged him to bring that young girl around because her adoration flattered my ego. She made me feel influential and relevant again. While you were always so exceptionally capable, so self-reliant. You never required my social guidance or validation, and I deeply resented you for it." Her confession hung heavily in the morning air. It was a pathetic, deeply tragic admission delivered far too late to matter. "Your acknowledgement is noted for the record, Eleanor," I replied in a flat, clinical tone. "But it alters nothing on the ground. You made your strategic selection. You publicly toasted and welcomed the woman who actively assisted your son in dismantling our marriage and embezzling shared marital equity. You are no longer my mother-in-law. You are simply the mother of the man who violated his legal fiduciary duties and attempted to rob me." I paused. "We have nothing further to discuss. Serafina, please, I am begging you. Goodbye, Eleanor." I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the marble counter. The physical tremors from the previous evening had vanished entirely. The lingering tears were gone. In their place sat a deep, quiet reservoir of personal authority. I had taken their most aggressive attempt at public humiliation and converted it into absolute moral vindication. I had taken my deepest physical vulnerability and transformed it into an impenetrable shield. The high society ambush was definitively over. I hadn't merely survived their battlefield. I had conquered it. As I opened my iPad to check the morning financial markets, a secondary headline caught my eye. Vance Capital shares drop 8% in early trading amid executive marital fallout and institutional investor anxiety. The war in the society ballrooms was won, but the decisive corporate campaign for his financial empire and my ultimate independence was entering its final, lethal phase. I tapped my speed dial for legal counsel. "Rebecca, the revised settlement documents are fully finalized," Rebecca announced. However, Bronski is dragging his feet on executing the signatures. They are scrambling to engineer a new defensive legal strategy. "Do not grant them a single inch of breathing room," I commanded, staring directly at the downward-sloping stock chart on my screen. "Apply maximum pressure across all fronts. Let's see how resilient their defensive strategy is when the underlying structural foundation catches fire." The aftermath of the MoMA Gala settled into a steady, intense background hum across Manhattan high society. My surgical scar, once a deeply private physical reality shared exclusively between husband and wife, was now public domain. Complete strangers occasionally recognized me in midtown coffee shops or airport lounges, their gaze instinctively drifting toward my collarbone with a mixture of voyeuristic pity and morbid curiosity. The tabloid press had unofficially branded it the scar heard round the world. For nearly 2 weeks, I served as the involuntary global symbol for betrayed, resilient womanhood. I despised the reductionist framing loathing, seeing my personal trauma, my rage, and a decade of my life distilled into a clickbait headline, but I fully appreciated its strategic utility. In the court of public opinion, I was entirely bulletproof. Saint Seraphina, the devoted wife who bled for her husband only to be stabbed in the back. Even Eleanor's extensive network of society gossips couldn't counteract that overwhelming narrative momentum. On the legal battlefield, our pieces advanced with ruthless precision. Leo, operating through an increasingly exasperated Marty Bronski, had executed the preliminary property settlement agreement, but attached a mandatory legal rider, a formal, court-ordered dispute mediation session prior to final judicial sign-off. It was a classic delay tactic, a desperate attempt to locate an emotional vulnerability or force a minor financial concession. "It's purely performative," Rebecca assured me during a prep call. "He's praying you'll experience a moment of nostalgic weakness or exhaustion and leave some capital on the table. Do not concede a single dollar." I had zero intention of conceding a dime. My daily routine settled into a strange, highly productive rhythm. I spent my days inside the Soho loft, which systematically transitioned from an emotional sanctuary into a high-powered corporate headquarters. Architectural blueprints for Phoenix Collective's future brick-and-mortar incubator space covered the brick walls. Complex financial spreadsheets and capitalization tables occupied multiple monitors. Andrew was a constant, stabilizing presence. His analytical pragmatism served as a vital anchor amidst the emotional turbulence. We operated as seamless partners across every dimension except the romantic, though occasionally, late at night over takeout Thai food and financial modeling, I would catch him observing me with an expression that carried far deeper resonance than simple professional respect. Whenever that happened, I quietly averted my gaze. My emotional vault remained firmly locked, and I had deliberately misplaced the combination. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the text message pinged across my display. It wasn't dispatched by Leo or his legal bulldog. It originated from an acquaintance I had largely forgotten, Isabel Crane, a superficial Upper East Side socialite who occupied the fringes of Eleanor's circle. Her message was awkward, hesitant, and laced with performative concern. "Isabel, Seraphina, darling, I know this is a terrible intrusion, and you have every right to tell me to jump in the East River, but Chloe Bennett just reached out to me in absolute distress. She is begging for a private meeting with you. She claims it is a life or death emergency regarding a pregnancy. I am simply acting as a neutral messenger. I am deeply sorry for everything you are going through." I stared at the glowing screen. A pregnancy. A freezing, absolute calm settled deep within my chest. So that was their next strategic pivot. A miracle baby. It was the oldest, most cliché defensive play in the matrimonial warfare manual, almost insulting in its lack of sophistication. Leo must be facing absolute insolvency to authorize such a transparent ploy, and Chloe was naive enough to execute it. I passed the iPhone across the table to Andrew. He scanned the message and let out a harsh, dry scoff. "A baby? Are you kidding me? The biological timeline doesn't even hold water, unless they conceived the exact afternoon you boarded your flight to Miami." "It isn't about biological reality, Andrew," I replied, my voice steady. "It's emotional narrative warfare. She's trying to construct an innocent future that I am supposedly destroying out of spite. She wants to reframe me as the cold, vindictive ex-wife actively depriving an unborn child of financial security." I tapped my fingernails rhythmically against the mahogany table. "She wants a face-to-face sit-down." "You aren't seriously considering entertaining this," Andrew said, leaning forward sharply. "It's a setup. She'll have a paparazzi photographer tipped off and hidden across the street. She'll try to provoke you into a public verbal altercation." "I am fully aware," I replied. "But occasionally, the most efficient method for disabling a landmine is to step directly onto the pressure plate on your own terms." I picked up the phone and replied to Isabel. "Confirm the meeting. Tomorrow morning, exactly 10 o'clock. The ground floor cafe inside the Whitney Museum." The venue selection was highly deliberate. Public, well-lit, secure, and entirely within my geographic control. The following morning, I dressed with calculated minimalism, cream-colored tailored silk trousers, a black cashmere turtleneck, and minimalist diamond stud earrings. I projected the aesthetic of a high-powered executive taking a brief pause between corporate board meetings to resolve a minor administrative nuisance. Chloe was already seated at a corner table when I arrived. Her pale face was carefully constructed to project intense vulnerability. Subtle under-eye concealer accentuating exhaustion, minimal lipstick, and a flowing, lavender empire waist dress designed to suggest the earliest hint of a maternal profile. She gripped a glass of iced water with both hands, presenting the quintessential image of fragile innocence. I pulled out the opposite chair and sat down without offering a greeting. "You have exactly 15 minutes, I stated, checking my stainless steel Cartier watch. "I have an international conference call at 11. Her lower lip trembled slightly, a highly credible physical performance. She had always possessed natural theatrical instincts. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Serafina," she whispered, her voice fragile. "I know you must harbor immense hatred toward me. Hatred requires a significant expenditure of emotional capital." "I have reallocated my reserves," I replied coldly. "Your intermediary indicated an urgent situation involving a pregnancy. Is Leo the biological father?" I bypassed her anticipated, tearful opening monologue, striking directly at the core mechanism of her play. The blunt directness clearly threw her off balance. She had braced for a slow, emotional sparring match. "Yes, of course he is," she stammered, placing a protective, possessive palm across her lower abdomen. "We are deeply in love, Serafina. Your marriage to him was functionally dead years before I returned to New York. This baby is an unexpected blessing, a genuine fresh start for him, and for our future together." I didn't blink. I signaled the waiter and ordered a double espresso, allowing the uncomfortable silence to stretch across the table. She leaned forward, her whisper growing more urgent. "I am exactly 10 weeks along. We already confirmed the fetal heartbeat on the ultrasound. It is a genuine miracle." A single, perfectly timed tear spilled over her lower lid. "Leo is ecstatic. He wants to step up and build a real family. But with this aggressive divorce litigation, with you attempting to freeze his equity, you are systematically destroying his livelihood. How is he supposed to provide for his newborn child?" There it was. The seamless pivot from maternal miracle to financial extortion. "What specifically are you demanding, Chloe?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely devoid of inflection. She drew a deep, shaky breath, attempting to project maturity. "I don't want to see him destroyed. You need to demonstrate basic human reasonableness. Drop your aggressive financial claims against his personal firm equity. Allow him to retain his 30% stake without the oppressive operational restrictions. That capital is necessary for his son's future security. Be the bigger person here. Walk away with clean hands for the sake of an innocent child." Her wide, beseeching eyes locked onto mine, a textbook display of emotional manipulation. I let her words dissipate into the cafe noise. My espresso arrived. I took a slow, deliberate sip, placed the cup back onto the saucer with a sharp click, and unzipped the slim leather portfolio I had brought with me. I withdrew a single legal document and slid it across the table toward her. "What is this?" she asked, her brow furrowing as she looked down. "A sworn, notarized affidavit executed by your Hamptons property manager, Lucia Mendez, dated 14 days ago," I replied evenly. "She testifies under penalty of perjury that you host weekend gatherings at the Southampton property Leo leases on your behalf. Specifically, she documents frequent, heavy consumption of illicit narcotics, including Schedule 1 white powder substances, by yourself and your house guests. She noted extensive drug residue left on the master bedroom surfaces." I leaned forward slightly. "Active cocaine consumption during the first trimester of a high-risk pregnancy. A fascinating maternal strategy." Chloe's face flushed violently crimson, then drained to a sickly, chalky white. That is an absolute fabrication. That disgruntled woman is lying. I will file a lawsuit against her for slander." "I am sure your legal counsel will attempt that," I said smoothly, pulling a second document from my portfolio. "Which brings us to Exhibit B. A certified medical records summary subpoenaed from Mount Sinai Hospital, detailing your surgical history from 18 months ago." Her breathing stopped entirely. "The records confirm a complete, radical total hysterectomy performed by Dr. Eris Thorne to resolve severe, chronic endometriosis." I read directly from the page. "Ovaries, fallopian tubes, and uterus entirely removed. I raised my eyes to meet her terrified gaze. A medical miracle indeed. Achieving a spontaneous intrauterine pregnancy 18 months post-hysterectomy. You should submit your case study to the New England Journal of Medicine. Every drop of color vanished from her face. She sat frozen, resembling a wax figurine. Her hands began to shake violently, and this time, it wasn't a rehearsed performance. Her mouth opened, but her vocal cords completely failed her. The carefully constructed facade of the glowing mother-to-be disintegrated into dust. That is a HIPAA violation. She finally managed to choke out, her voice barely a rasp. That is fraudulent. And finally, I continued, withdrawing a third document from my portfolio, genuinely savoring the clinical precision of the destruction. We have Exhibit C, a certified medical affidavit signed by Dr. Aaron Schiff, a prominent board-certified urologist practicing on Park Avenue. I placed the document face up directly in front of her. Dr. Schiff certifies that Leonardo Vance underwent a elective, bilateral outpatient vasectomy exactly 5 years ago. The post-operative screenings confirmed total azoospermia, 0 sperm count. I tilted my head, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. He has been biologically incapable of siring a child since the fall of 2021. The ultimate hammer blow landed with crushing finality. Chloe stared at the medical affidavit in absolute abject horror. Slowly, the realization registered in her eyes. Her entire strategic house of cards, the miracle pregnancy, the financial leverage, the permanent anchor to a wealthy family was built on a double foundation of absolute biological impossibilities. He explicitly told me he wanted to start a family with me, she whispered, her voice breaking into genuine, ragged despair. He told me you were the career-obsessed wife who refused to have children. He lied to you, Chloe, I replied, gathering up my documents and sliding them back into my leather portfolio. He lied to me for a decade. He lied to you for 6 months. And he consistently lies to himself to avoid facing his own reflection. I zipped the portfolio shut. Leo was deeply paranoid about bringing a child into an unstable marriage that might end in a massive alimony dispute. I personally recommended the vasectomy. He agreed it was the most strategic financial decision for our household. I looked down at her shattered posture. So, let's review your strategic options. Either you are experiencing a documented medical miracle involving immaculate conception post-hysterectomy while snorting cocaine, or you are actively attempting to execute a multi-million-dollar financial extortion scheme against a corporate executive using fraudulent medical claims. I stood up from the table, adjusting the strap of my bag. Which exact narrative would you prefer my legal team deliver to the Metro editor at the New York Post tonight? The Gallery Girl's miracle baby scam? It possesses a remarkably catchy ring to it. She was sobbing genuinely now ugly, gasping breaths completely stripped of social grace or performative charm. You are a sociopath, she spat, tears streaking her mascara down her cheeks. Are you getting sadistic pleasure out of destroying my life? No, I replied, tossing a $50 bill onto the table to cover the espresso. I derive zero pleasure from this. I simply eliminate operational inefficiencies. I looked down at her one last time. Do not contact my legal team, my business colleagues, or my social circle ever again. And I strongly recommend retaining a superior creative writing consultant before your next extortion attempt. This script was amateurish. I turned to walk toward the museum exit. Suddenly, her hand shot out, clamping tightly around my wrist, a desperate, clawing grip. Please, she begged, her voice rising in genuine panic. If Leo discovers you know about this, if he finds out I attempted to leverage a fake pregnancy, he will cut me off completely. I will have absolutely nothing left. I glanced down at her fingers, wrapped around my wrist, then executed a slow, calm detachment, brushing her hand away with surgical detachment. I held her panicked gaze. You never possessed anything real with him to begin with, Chloe. You were simply a shiny, temporary status symbol to stroke his ego. Now you are a depreciated, damaged asset. I paused. I would wish you luck in your future endeavors. But we both know luck has nothing to do with surviving in this city. I walked out of the museum cafe into the crisp spring sunshine. By all standard metrics, it was an absolute tactical triumph. I had dismantled her leverage, exposed her fraud, and secured total dominance over the narrative. Yet, as I stood waiting for my car service, I felt an expansive, echoing emptiness. The web of deceit Leo had spun around our lives was so profound, so thoroughly toxic, that even dismantling it felt like handling hazardous waste. My cell phone vibrated in my palm. A direct text from Leo, typed out in a erratic, angry capitalization. Leo, what the hell did you just say to Chloe? She is sitting in her apartment, hysterical. She claims you fabricated disgusting, horrific lies about my medical history. I stepped into the back of my waiting town car, closed the door, and typed back with unhurried precision. Serafina, I simply informed her of the factual reality regarding your 2021 vasectomy procedure. It is truly fascinating what critical details you neglect to mention to your live-in mistress, almost as fascinating as the financial details you neglected to mention to your legal spouse. I suggest you focus your immediate energy on managing her emotional collapse. She currently believes you represent her financial salvation. I would estimate you are approximately 48 hours away from becoming her highly publicized, deeply litigious ex-boyfriend. I hit send, then immediately accessed his contact card and tapped block this caller. The direct communication line was permanently severed. When I returned to the Soho loft, Andrew was sitting at the conference table reviewing legal drafts, looking up expectantly as the private elevator doors parted. Well? He asked, studying my face. How did the expectant mother handle the encounter? She isn't pregnant, I replied, dropping my portfolio onto the side console. In fact, she is anatomically incapable of carrying a pregnancy. And Leo underwent a successful vasectomy 5 years ago. Andrew blinked twice in rapid succession, processed the data, and then threw his head back, letting out a roaring, incredulous laugh. You have got to be kidding me. He attempted to deploy a fake pregnancy extortion scheme against a man who is medically sterile? Desperation induces profound intellectual degradation, I observed, though I didn't join in his laughter. I walked slowly over to the expansive industrial windows, staring out across the sunlit rooftops of Soho. She is merely a peripheral symptom, Andrew, a desperate, glittering symptom of the foundational rot. I rested my palm against the cool glass. He is a man who has constructed his existence on such a vast, interlocking lattice of lies that he genuinely cannot distinguish absolute factual reality from his own internal PR spin anymore. Andrew's laughter subsided completely. He stood up from the table and walked over to stand beside me at the window, maintaining a respectful, steady silence. You aren't experiencing sympathetic regret for her, are you? No, I answered immediately, and it was absolute objective truth. But I don't feel any triumphant elevation either. I simply feel sanitized. As if I finally scrubbed the last layer of infectious residue off my professional record. I turned to face him directly. The court mediation session is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I want this entire procedure finalized. I want the door welded shut. It will be finalized, Andrew said, his voice ringing with absolute, unwavering conviction. He has zero leverage left on the table. We hold every single piece on the board. I sincerely hoped his assessment was correct. But that night, lying alone in my minimalist bedroom, the evidentiary documents I had deployed against Chloe flashed relentlessly across my eyelids. The surgical records, the drug affidavits, the urology reports. They were cold, lethal instruments, gathered with ruthless efficiency to execute a war I had never initiated. The young woman who had gently held Leo's hand inside that Park Avenue medical clinic 5 years prior, the supportive wife who had reassured him that electing a vasectomy was the right path to preserve their shared corporate focus felt like a naive, historical stranger. That trusting woman was officially deceased. In her place stood someone entirely different, hardened, hyper-lucid, completely armored, and fundamentally alone. The ultimate revelation of the day wasn't regarding Chloe Bennett's fraudulent character. It was the final, irreversible burial of my own romantic illusions. The court-mandated mediation session convened at precisely 9 o'clock the following morning inside a high-security conference room on the 40th floor of a midtown legal tower, a sterile, expensive environment specifically engineered to divide generational wealth and extinguish emotional attachments. The air smelled of stale corporate coffee, lemon-scented cleaning chemicals, and suppressed hostility. Rebecca and I arrived 15 minutes early. She looked formidable in a tailored dove gray Armani suit, placing a thick leather briefcase onto the polished mahogany table that contained far more than standard legal filings. It held the systematic autopsies of both a marriage and a corporate firm. I wore a simple, structured black crepe dress, my hair pulled back tightly. I felt emotionally detached, viewing the unfolding proceedings from an elevated, clinical perspective. Leo and Marty Bronski arrived 3 minutes late, accompanied by a stressed junior associate carrying stacks of document boxes. Leo looked as though he hadn't achieved REM sleep in weeks. His designer suit hung loosely from his frame, indicating rapid weight loss. His bloodshot, sunken eyes flicked toward mine the instant he entered the room, then immediately dropped to the floor, unable to sustain contact. The swaggering Wall Street executive was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, defensive shell. Bronski, however, arrived prepared for aggressive combat. He offered Rebecca a sharp, non-verbal nod and arranged his legal pads with theatrical precision. The court-appointed mediator, a retired New York State Supreme Court justice named Franklin, initiated the session with a flat, administrative tone. We sat positioned on opposite sides of the massive conference table, separated by a neutral buffer zone of mineral water bottles and legal notepads. Our primary objective this morning, Judge Franklin stated, adjusting his reading glasses, is to establish a mutually agreeable property dissolution framework without subjecting either party or their respective corporate entities to a protracted, highly public judicial trial. He looked directly across at Bronski. Mr. Bronski, your client executed the preliminary settlement framework under formal legal protest. Let us address those specific reservations immediately. Bronski leaned forward, resting his forearms heavily on the table. Your Honor, my client contends that the proposed 80-20 liquid asset distribution is grossly punitive and entirely unconscionable. It is constructed upon exaggerated claims of marital misconduct and driven by clear, vindictive intent. Rebecca didn't shift her posture by a single millimeter. The distribution structure is based upon documented, severe fiduciary theft of shared marital equity. The co-respondent siphoned nearly $250,000 out of joint savings accounts to capitalize a real estate venture for his romantic partner, utilizing forged signatures on commercial loan documents. That is not an exaggerated claim of misconduct, Mr. Bronski. That is actionable financial fraud. Leo stiffened in his chair, his jaw clenching. Bronski raised a hand, dismissive. Allegations which we categorically reject as systemic accounting misunderstandings. Furthermore, Your Honor, we believe the petitioner's own ongoing personal conduct is highly relevant to the distribution equation. An icy chill prickled at the base of my skull. Here it comes. What specific conduct are you referring to, counsel? Judge Franklin inquired. Bronski snapped open a manila folder with dramatic flair. We possess credible, substantiated intelligence, indicating that the petitioner has been maintaining an ongoing, intimate personal relationship with her business partner, Mr. Andrew West, a romantic entanglement that significantly predates the physical separation of the parties. The accusation landed on the mahogany table like a toxic spill, ugly, desperate, and entirely fabricated. Rebecca remained physically motionless, but her professional aura turned lethal. Leo kept his eyes glued to the tabletop, lacking the basic courage to look me in the eye while his attorney executed the smear campaign. Mr. Bronski, Judge Franklin warned, his voice dropping an octave. Rebecca flashed a razor-thin, glacial smile. That is an utterly baseless, desperate attempt at character assassination designed to distract from your client's documented criminal liability. Mr. West is my client's corporate co-founder and trusted professional colleague. We are prepared to submit comprehensive, sworn affidavits from corporate staff counteracting this slander immediately. Bronski slid an 8x10 surveillance photograph across the center table. It captured Andrew and me exiting the front doors of the peninsula together at 7:30 in the morning 2 weeks ago, walking shoulder to shoulder toward a waiting town car. They were documented cohabitating inside a luxury hotel suite for 9 hours overnight. Immediately following the separation, Bronski asserted aggressively, I secured temporary lodging at that hotel following the public discovery of your client's infidelity. I spoke up, my voice ringing with crystal-clear authority that cut through Bronski's theatrical bluster. Mr. West attended an emergency corporate advisory meeting inside that suite at 7:30 in the morning, with my legal counsel, Miss Stein, and a certified forensic accounting team physically present in the room. We were executing legal strategy to protect my firm equity from further illegal embezzlement. It was not a romantic rendezvous, Mr. Bronski. It was a corporate crisis war room. Bronski ignored the factual clarification, pushing forward. We also possess wire transfer records indicating continuous, highly questionable capital flows between the petitioner's private accounts and Mr. West's new venture fund. Objection, Rebecca cut in sharply, her tone slicing through the air like a scalpel. This posturing is entirely tedious. If you hold legitimate evidentiary documentation of financial misconduct, present it to the mediator immediately. Otherwise, cease the performative slander. She paused, letting her cold gaze sweep over Leo. Because we hold documented, undeniable proof of massive financial fraud, forged loan guarantees, illicit wire transfers, and the sworn deposition testimony of your client's romantic partner, Miss Chloe Bennett. Leo's head snapped up violently. Pure, unadulterated panic flashed across his face. He had zero idea that Rebecca's team had already formally deposed Chloe, following our Whitney Museum encounter. Bronsky hesitated, clearly blindsided by the mention of the deposition. Rebecca immediately seized the tactical opening. Given counsel's insistence on questioning moral character and fiduciary integrity, Your Honor, we believe it is necessary to present the mediator with the complete, unvarnished scope of Mr. Vance's financial activities. She unlatched her leather briefcase. I formally request permission to introduce a brief statement from a rebuttal witness currently waiting in the outer reception area. Judge Franklin frowned slightly. Live witness testimony is highly unusual during a standard civil mediation session, Miss Stein. As are the egregious circumstances surrounding this dissolution, Your Honor. Rebecca countered smoothly. A heavy silence stretched across the room. Judge Franklin offered a curt nod. Bring the witness in. But keep the testimony strictly relevant to the asset distribution matrix. Rebecca gestured to her junior associate, who promptly stood up and opened the conference room door. A moment later, a tall, impeccably tailored man in his early 30s walked into the room. He possessed the clean, sharp presentation of a former Ivy League athlete turned Wall Street managing director, nervous, but carrying an unmistakable air of authority. Leo stared at the entering stranger. For 3 seconds, his face registered pure confusion. Then, dawning recognition hit him, rapidly morphing into absolute, catastrophic terror. He recognized the man standing at the end of the table. State your full legal name and current professional capacity for the formal record, Rebecca directed clearly. Tyler Ross, the man replied in a steady voice. I am currently a senior managing director of equities trading at Goldman Sachs. And what is your historical connection to Leonardo Vance and Miss Chloe Bennett? Tyler glanced briefly down the table at Leo, his expression tightening with visible professional disgust before turning his attention back to Judge Franklin. I maintained a romantic relationship with Chloe Bennett for approximately 18 months, terminating last autumn. During the final months of our relationship, I became aware that she had resumed an intimate relationship with Mr. Vance. How precisely did that information come to your attention, Mr. Ross? Rebecca inquired gently. Tyler drew a measured breath. Chloe frequently boasted about her high society connections. She bragged extensively about how Leo was financing her lifestyle and securing commercial real estate for her art gallery. His voice hardened significantly. Specifically, 8 months ago, she explicitly attempted to pass along a piece of financial intelligence to me regarding a publicly traded clinical stage biotechnology equity, in which my trading desk maintained a substantial portfolio position. The entire room went dead silent. Even Bronsky stopped writing on his legal pad, his posture freezing completely. What specific firm equity did she reference, Mr. Ross? Next Therapeutics, Tyler stated clearly. She explicitly told me that Leo had assured her the stock was an absolute guaranteed winner because he possessed a direct contact inside the FDA Regulatory Review Board, who had personally tipped him off that their flagship oncology drug would receive accelerated clinical approval the following week. She urged me to execute personal call options based on that intelligence. Tyler paused, looking directly at the retired judge. I am a licensed Series 7 and Series 24 securities trader. Your Honor, I immediately recognized the communication as actionable, non-public material inside information. Federal insider trading. Leo's breathing turned ragged and rapid, echoing loudly in the sterile room. He looked physically ill, grasping the edge of the table to maintain his balance. Did you execute trading volume based upon that illicit communication, Mr. Ross? Rebecca asked. Absolutely not, Tyler replied firmly. I immediately documented the interaction and reported the attempted tip directly to Goldman Sachs' internal compliance and legal oversight. We initiated a mandatory internal audit and froze our desk's position in Next Therapeutics to avoid regulatory contamination. I subsequently terminated my relationship with Miss Bennett. He paused for emphasis. 10 days later, the FDA formally announced the accelerated approval. Next, Therapeutics equity tripled in valuation over a 48-hour trading window. Dead silence suffocated the conference room. Bronsky's face had drained to the exact sickly gray color of wet cement. He slowly placed his pen down on his legal pad. He was a veteran matrimonial litigator. He knew precisely what had just materialized on the table. This was no longer a messy property division. This was a multi-year federal white-collar criminal investigation involving SEC enforcement and potential prison sentences. Did Mr. Vance personally execute trades utilizing that illicit information? Rebecca inquired smoothly. According to data uncovered during SEC preliminary inquiries following compliance reporting, Tyler stated calmly, Vance Capital executed aggressive, highly leveraged options contracts on Next Therapeutics 3 days prior to the public regulatory announcement, generating an estimated net capital gain of approximately $3 million capital, which directly prevented Vance Capital from defaulting on institutional margin requirements that quarter. Tyler looked squarely at Judge Franklin. I agreed to appear here today voluntarily because Ms. Stein's investigative team contacted Goldman Compliance. Mr. Vance utilized his romantic partner as a casual conduit for federal securities fraud. It was not merely marital infidelity, it was systemic corporate corruption. Rebecca let the devastating weight of the testimony settle into the wood of the conference table. Thank you, Mr. Ross. You are excused. Tyler offered a polite nod to the mediator, turned on his heel, and walked out of the room, closing the heavy door firmly behind him. Rebecca shifted her gaze directly toward Judge Franklin, her tone entirely matter-of-fact. Your Honor, this testimony establishes a direct, documented evidentiary nexus between Mr. Vance's extramarital activities and severe, ongoing federal financial crimes. It demonstrates a clear pattern of illegal capitalization, indicating that the corporate assets he currently seeks to shield within this dissolution are very likely the proceeds of criminal wire and securities fraud. She let a brief beat of silence pass. In that precise legal context, our proposed 80-20 property settlement agreement is not merely equitable, it is extraordinarily generous. We are offering Mr. Vance a clean civil exit that avoids triggering immediate judicial reporting to federal regulatory authorities. Judge Franklin removed his reading glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. When he looked up, his expression toward Leo was filled with absolute, freezing judicial contempt. Do you have any questions for the witness, Mr. Bronsky? The mediator inquired dryly. Or any substantive rebuttal documentation to present? Bronsky seemed to have physically shrunk inside his expensive suit. He looked at his client, a man who had completely concealed severe federal criminal liability from his own counsel, with unmistakable professional fury. We would request a brief recess to confer with my client, Your Honor. There will be no recess, counsel, Judge Franklin stated, with crushing finality. Based upon the documented financial exhibits, the admitted signature forgeries, and the highly credible testimony regarding federal securities violations presented this morning, I am prepared to issue my binding judicial mediation recommendation immediately. He locked eyes directly with Bronsky. The asset distribution structure, drafted by petitioner's counsel, is entirely fair, appropriate, and legally justified under the egregious circumstances of this case. I strongly advise your client to execute the settlement documents immediately as drafted, and to thank whatever deity he subscribes to, that this matter is concluding in a civil matrimonial conference room, rather than a federal grand jury proceeding. Checkmate. The entire structural architecture of Leo's defense had been vaporized in less than 20 minutes. Leo slowly lifted his head. His sunken, bloodshot eyes bypassed his attorney, bypassed the retired judge, and locked directly onto mine. His voice came out as a broken, hollow rasp. You orchestrated this entire execution, he whispered. You brought him here specifically to destroy me. I met his gaze directly for the first time all morning. I felt zero anger, zero triumph, and zero lingering sorrow. I simply felt absolute, crystalline clarity. I didn't destroy your life, Leo, I said softly, my voice carrying steady across the table. You constructed your own demolition. I simply handed you the detonator and stepped out of the blast radius. What followed was purely administrative. Pens clicked open. Initials were applied to signature tabs. Bronsky executed his counsel endorsements with rigid, furious speed, eager to terminate his professional association with a client who carried active federal criminal exposure. Within 14 minutes, the legal dissolution of our 10-year marriage was a fully executed reality. Rebecca neatly gathered our signed counterparts into her leather briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut with a definitive click. Leo stood up slowly from his chair, leaning heavily against the edge of the table for physical support. He looked across the mahogany expanse at me, the woman who had dedicated her youth to building his name, the woman who had carried his corporate burdens, the woman who bore a 6-inch surgical scar across her ribs to preserve his physical life. You are a cold, emotionless machine, he rasped, his voice trembling with bitter impotence. You treat human beings like lines on a corporate balance sheet. I stood up, smoothing the front of my black crepe dress. I looked down at him without a shred of sympathy. I loved you with every fiber of my being, Leo, I said clearly. And you systematically converted that love into the single most toxic, non-performing liability of my entire professional career. I picked up my handbag. Consider this complete asset divestment. I turned and walked out of the conference room, Rebecca striding smoothly beside me. We didn't exchange a single word until the elevator doors glided shut, sealing us off from the 40th floor. The SEC Enforcement Division will receive the Tyler Ross interview transcripts via secure courier by 3 o'clock this afternoon, Rebecca noted quietly, watching the digital floor indicator descend. Goldman Compliance has already initiated formal regulatory transmission. His professional career is effectively over. I offered a single, curt nod. The victory felt completely sterile, like completing a highly complex, aggressive surgical amputation. The limb had been diseased and deeply toxic, but removing it left an undeniable, echoing alteration in my center of gravity. When we stepped out through the revolving glass doors of the office tower into the bright midtown sunshine, Andrew was waiting parked at the curb beside his sleek black Mercedes sedan. He leaned against the driver's side door, his expression tight with anxiety until he caught sight of my posture. The tension drained out of his shoulders instantly. He straightened up and opened his arms slightly. I didn't collapse into his embrace, but I stepped close enough to feel the solid, reassuring warmth of his presence. It's finished, I said simply. Good, Andrew replied softly, opening the passenger door for me. I paused with my hand on the car frame, looking up and down the bustling Manhattan street. For the first time in over 3 years, my mental horizon wasn't crowded by defensive calculations, corporate crisis management, or the exhausting labor of compensating for another person's insecurities. The future stretched out in front of me, a completely blank, unmapped expanse of clean territory. Let's head back to the loft, I said, feeling a fresh, invigorating spark of forward momentum ignite deep inside my chest. We have the final capital allocation review for Phoenix Collective at 2 o'clock, and I want to restructure our Series A strategy. We are going to launch a dedicated venture fund specifically targeting female founders in clinical biotechnology. We are going to legitimately fund and develop the exact medical breakthroughs that men like Leo attempt to exploit, through illegal insider trading. Andrew's eyes lit up with profound professional respect and genuine warmth. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face. Now that is an extraordinary strategic vision. I stepped into the car. The heavy door clicked shut with a solid, satisfying thunk. The vehicle pulled smoothly out into the flowing midtown traffic, merging seamlessly into the current of the city. I didn't look out the rear window even once. My eyes remained fixed strictly on the clear road ahead, the first clean line drawn across a brand new canvas. 6 months unfolded in what felt simultaneously like a single breath and an entire lifetime. The emotional dust had completely settled. The divorce decree was a finalized, court-stamped document filed away inside a fireproof safe in my home office. The subsequent corporate and legal dismantling of Leonardo Vance had unfolded with swift, merciless efficiency. Following Tyler Ross's formal compliance disclosures, the SEC Enforcement Division, working in conjunction with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District, had launched a comprehensive federal investigation into Vance Capital's trading operations. The firm collapsed almost overnight. Institutional accounts fled en masse, credit facilities were permanently frozen, and firm assets were liquidated at fire sale valuations to cover mounting civil penalties and criminal defense retainers. The Vance family name, once uttered with reverent respect in Upper East Side dining rooms, was now a cautionary tale of hubris, regulatory noncompliance, and severe financial ruin. Rebecca occasionally forwarded summary updates regarding his pending plea bargains and civil liabilities to my inbox. I systematically deleted them without reading past the subject lines. That chapter of my existence was permanently archived. My entire intellectual and creative capacity was poured entirely into Phoenix Collective. The ground floor retail space at 455 West 22nd Street in Chelsea, the exact physical property where Chloe Bennett's Vanity Gallery had died before birth, had undergone a complete architectural metamorphosis. We had stripped the interior down to its raw structural bones. The exposed red brick walls and soaring industrial ceilings no longer housed overpriced, derivative abstract artwork. Instead, they framed sleek glass conference pods, high-definition presentation monitors, and the glowing corporate logos of our first 12 portfolio startups. The atmosphere inside the space didn't carry the quiet, pretentious sterility of an art gallery. It buzzed with electric, high-octane creative momentum. Software engineers wrote code on floor-to-ceiling glass whiteboards. Biotech researchers debated clinical trial parameters. Female founders pitched expansion strategies to venture partners. Tonight was our official launch reception. The gallery floor was packed to capacity, but the demographic composition was entirely different from Eleanor's stuffy limestone townhouse. We had assembled a vibrant, powerful cross-section of modern New York. Venture capital managing directors in tailored blazers, technology journalists from Forbes and TechCrunch, institutional fund managers, and most importantly, our portfolio founders. They were brilliant, fiercely driven women from every imaginable background, standing proudly beside their prototype displays with the distinct, unmistakable posture of architects building their own futures. I circulated through the crowd holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, wearing a genuine, unforced smile. My outfit was a custom-tailored, architectural black jumpsuit designed by one of our own portfolio founders, a brilliant young graduate of Parsons School of Design who had engineered a revolutionary line of adaptive luxury professional wear utilizing concealed, high-strength magnetic closures. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely aligned with my physical skin. Andrew appeared at my side near a central demonstration hub, where a 26-year-old MIT graduate was showcasing an AI-driven logistical platform engineered to streamline the placement of foster youth into permanent housing. Andrew looked exceptionally sharp in a tailored charcoal suit paired with a crisp white shirt, worn without a tie. He surveyed the buzzing, high-energy room, his chest rising with deep pride. He leaned down slightly, his voice cutting clearly through the ambient chatter. "You built this, Serafina. Every single square foot of this." I swept my gaze across the thriving floor. "We built this, Andrew." Yet, the warmth radiating inside my chest was undeniable. This was my personal domain, not inherited through lineage, not secured via marriage, and not compromised by hidden liabilities. It had been conceptualized by my intellect, capitalized by my hard-won equity, and executed on my own ethical terms. Even the marital capital recovered from Leo's attempted embezzlement had been systematically repurposed, serving as the foundational seed funding for a single mother engineering low-cost, high-efficiency water filtration systems for urban infrastructure. Absolute, productive justice. I stepped up onto a low, circular wooden presentation platform in the center of the room. There was no formal podium, just a single wireless microphone. As the feedback hummed softly, the ambient chatter across the gallery floor rapidly died down. Dozens of faces turned toward the center stage. "Good evening, everyone," I projected, my voice steady, resonant, and effortless. Exactly 6 months ago, this physical building was an empty, vacant shell. It was secured through financial deception and constructed upon a foundation of fundamental dishonesty. A knowing, respectful silence settled over the room. Tonight, it operates as a launchpad constructed upon absolute objective truth. I gestured outward toward the surrounding founder displays. The truth that intellectual capital possesses no gender, the truth that execution matters far more than entitlement, and the truth that women who for generations have been systematically advised to speak quieter, operate smaller, and serve as passive infrastructure for the ambitions of others are not merely decorative muses. I paused, locking eyes with several of our young founders in the front row. "We are primary architects." Enthusiastic applause rippled across the room before I raised a hand to continue. "The Phoenix Collective was not named because we believe in passively rising from cold ashes," I stated firmly. "Rising from ashes implies that you allowed yourself to be burned to the ground first. Our philosophy centers on harnessing the intense, transformative heat of adversity. It is about taking the exact forces that attempted to destroy your structural integrity and converting them into high-output kinetic energy to illuminate the path for every individual who follows behind you." Thunderous, sustained applause erupted across the gallery. Cheers and clinking glasses resonated off the exposed brick walls. I stepped down from the platform, instantly surrounded by supporters, founders, and eager institutional investors. A brilliant startup founder named Dr. Eris Thorne gripped my forearm tightly, her eyes shining with emotion. "Thank you, Serafina. You have no concept of what this capitalization means for my research laboratory and for my daughter's future." I squeezed her hand warmly. "Show me your quarterly projection models, Eris. Go build something monumental." 40 minutes later, While standing near the rear espresso bar discussing user acquisition metrics with a tech journalist, a subtle shift in the room's visual currents caught my attention. I looked toward the glass entryway. Standing hovering just outside the main glass doors, lingering on the Chelsea sidewalk beneath the streetlights, was Leo. He resembled a ghost haunting the physical footprint of his former life. He wore the exact same charcoal suit he had worn during our court mediation sessions 6 months prior, but it now hung off his frame with fabric pooling around his shoulders. His face was severely gaunt, his features drawn and etched with the permanent weight of legal exhaustion and public disgrace. He stood staring through the glass at the thriving, high-energy event inside, his eyes searching the crowd until they locked directly onto mine. His gaze contained a chaotic, swirling mixture of profound regret, lingering resentment, and absolute, devastating disbelief. 2 members of our private event security detail spotted him loitering near the entrance. They immediately stepped forward, their posture shifting into firm, defensive barriers. Leo watched the security personnel approach. For a single microsecond, his shoulders tensed, as if he might attempt to force his way inside, cause a public scene, or demand an audience. 6 months ago, he would have done precisely that. Now, he simply stood frozen on the concrete sidewalk, separated from my world by a half-inch of tempered glass. I held his gaze across the 70 feet of crowded gallery space. I offered no triumphant smirk, no cold anger, and no lingering sadness. I simply projected complete, unassailable composure. I was standing firmly at the dead center of my personal empire. He was standing outside in the New York drizzle. The security supervisor stepped outside, exchanging a brief, firm verbal instruction with him. Leo's posture completely collapsed. The final, lingering ember of his ego extinguished before my eyes. He cast one final, sweeping look across the brilliant gallery floor at the success he couldn't control. And the woman he couldn't break then turned slowly on his heel and walked away into the dark Chelsea night. The interruption registered like a pebble dropped into a vast ocean. The ripples vanished instantly. The high-energy momentum of the room never faltered. Andrew walked up beside me, subtly positioning his body between my line of sight and the glass doors. "Are you all right?" "I am entirely fine, Andrew," I replied. And it was absolute objective truth. I felt zero fear, zero rage, and zero pity. I merely felt profound detachment, like observing a predatory animal secured safely behind zoo glass. He is no longer relevant to our operational timeline. The reception continued late into the evening. One by one, the investors departed. The media representatives packed up their recording gear, and the startup founders carefully secured their prototype displays. By midnight, Andrew and I were the only 2 individuals remaining inside the expansive gallery space, surrounded by quiet, glowing monitors and the soft hum of the HVAC system. He walked over to the coat rack, retrieving my structured wool trench coat and holding it open for me. I slipped my arms into the sleeves, feeling his hands linger gently against the fabric of my shoulders for a single beat longer than strictly professional courtesy mandated. We walked out of the building together, locking the heavy glass doors securely behind us. The Chelsea street was quiet and washed clean by a brief evening shower. The spring air smelled of damp asphalt and distant ocean wind. We walked side by side down West 22nd Street toward 10th Avenue in companionable silence, allowing the adrenaline of the successful launch to systematically settle. "You delivered an extraordinary presentation tonight, Serafina," Andrew said softly, breaking the quiet. Not merely the formal address on stage, the entire execution. This space. It represents the pure, unfiltered essence of who you are. He paused, stopping under the glow of a street lamp. A master builder, an extraordinary creator. I turned to face him, leaning slightly against the brick exterior of a brownstone. Leo was always terrified of that creative capacity. He viewed it as a direct threat to his authority. "I am well aware," Andrew replied, his voice dropping into a deep, resonant register that completely lacked his usual corporate levity. "And it didn't hurt you tonight to see him out there?" "Not in the slightest," I answered firmly. It merely reinforced objective reality. He stepped half a pace closer to me on the damp sidewalk. The overhead street lamp cast clean, architectural shadows across his face. "There is something I have wanted to say to you for over 3 years, Serafina. Perhaps significantly longer." He drew a slow, deliberate breath. Every trace of the confident, untouchable private equity managing director stripped away, revealing an absolute, grounded vulnerability. The very first afternoon you walked into the conference room at Sterling West Private Equity 5 years ago, I sat across the table watching you dismantle a complex financial model, and I thought to myself, that woman contains an internal furnace. He offered a soft, rueful smile. And over the next several years, I had to sit back and watch you systematically damp down that fire, restricting your own brilliance, shrinking your operational footprint, and redirecting your immense heat to warm the fragile ego of a man who didn't possess the intellectual or moral capacity to appreciate it. I looked down at the pavement, a soft, genuine laugh escaping my lips. It was the equivalent of utilizing a Formula One engine to power a suburban golf cart. Precisely, Andrew agreed, his gaze locking intently onto mine. And then, 6 months ago, I watched the world attempt to systematically extinguish your fire completely. I watched you face profound marital betrayal, public social ambushes, and cutthroat legal warfare. And instead of allowing those forces to put out your flame, I watched you harness that exact heat to forge yourself into something entirely unprecedented, something magnificent, and completely unbreakable. He reached out slowly. His fingers brushed gently against the side of my face, tucking a stray strand of dark hair securely behind my ear. His touch was exceptionally steady, carrying immense physical warmth. So the question I have been holding in reserve for 3 years is simply this, Andrew murmured, his eyes searching mine with intense, honest clarity. Would you grant me the extraordinary privilege of allowing me to stand beside that fire? He paused, letting his fingers rest lightly against my cheekbone. Not standing in front of you to block your momentum, not standing above you to claim ownership of your achievements, but standing directly beside you to share your warmth, to match your intellectual capacity, and to help you build every single visionary concept that furnace of yours is capable of engineering. He didn't drop to one knee on the damp pavement. He didn't produce a velvet box containing a diamond ring. He didn't offer a cliché fairy tale narrative. He offered something infinitely more valuable and profoundly rare, an authentic equal partnership, a definitive promise to see me in my absolute entirety, and to actively choose both my structural strength and my emotional intensity without demanding compromise. Hot, sudden tears welled up inside my eyes, not tears of lingering grief or historical pain, but tears of profound, liberating relief. For 12 continuous months, I had functioned as a fortified concrete bunker, a tactical corporate strategist, a ruthless litigant, and an unyielding public symbol. The simple, radical concept of safely laying down my armor in the presence of another human being had felt like an operational impossibility. But Andrew wasn't requesting that I surrender my authority. He was actively validating it. I thought about the late-night strategy sessions inside the Soho loft. I thought about the silent, unwavering physical barrier he had formed between me and Chloe's cruelty at the MoMA Gala. I thought about his quiet pride watching me command the room at Phoenix Collective. He had never audited me as a broken woman requiring rescue, nor as a trophy requiring possession. He viewed me as an equal force of nature. The heavy structural vault around my heart didn't slowly unlatch. It dissolved completely into the spring night air. Yes, I whispered, my voice soft, but carrying absolute conviction. I tilted my face into the warmth of his palm, curving my lips into a slow, brilliant smile. You may formally submit your application for the co-founder position, Mr. West. The equity incentives are highly competitive, but I must warn you, the operational workload is exceptionally rigorous. He let out a low, vibrant laugh that echoed down the quiet Chelsea street, wrapped both arms firmly around my shoulders, and pulled me directly against his chest. His embrace wasn't restrictive or possessive. It felt entirely like coming home. I buried my face into the curve of his neck, breathing in the clean scent of rain and cedarwood, feeling every remaining knot of defensive tension release from my spine. The high-stakes corporate warfare was definitively concluded. The battlefield was cleared, and the horizon stretching out before us was extraordinarily bright. At 7 o'clock the following morning, the Wall Street Journal published a high-profile double-column feature on its corporate front page. On the left side ran a glowing profile titled, From Ashes to Empire, inside Serafina Vance's Phoenix Collective and the New Era of Venture Capital. Directly adjacent to it on the right column sat a brief, clinical legal notice. Vance Capital assets fully liquidated under federal bankruptcy restructuring. Former chief executive agrees to permanent SEC industry bar amid ongoing judicial inquiries. The structural contrast was absolute. I sat reading the digital edition at the polished granite kitchen island of my brand new penthouse apartment in the West Village, a stunning, sun-drenched sanctuary featuring private wraparound terraces that Andrew and I had jointly capitalized and purchased 3 weeks prior. My private cell phone chimed against the stone countertop. "It's Rebecca's office calling," Andrew called out from the espresso bar, walking toward me holding 2 freshly pulled cappuccinos. "Do you want me to intercept?" "I'll take it," I replied, tapping the speaker icon. "Good morning, Rebecca. Please tell me we don't have secondary property deeds to execute today." "No further property filings, Serafina," Rebecca replied, the tone uncharacteristically quiet and lacking its usual rapid-fire cadence. "I am transmitting a personal communication from legal counsel representing Eleanor Vance." I paused, setting down my coffee mug. "Eleanor? Our financial severance from her estate was fully finalized during the initial probate releases. This isn't a financial inquiry," Rebecca explained gently. Her legal counsel disclosed that Eleanor was diagnosed with aggressive, early-stage pulmonary carcinoma 10 days ago. She initiates oncology treatments at Memorial Sloan Kettering next Tuesday morning. She formally requested a brief, private meeting with you at her townhouse this Sunday afternoon. She wishes to offer an in-person, unconditional apology before entering surgery. The sunny West Village kitchen went completely still. Andrew placed his hands on the edge of the granite island, watching my facial expression with quiet, supportive attentiveness. Eleanor Vance, the matriarch who had actively championed my marital humiliation, who had viewed my intellectual capacity as a familial defect, and who had raised a son devoid of basic moral architecture. 6 months ago, hearing of her physical vulnerability might have triggered a dark, vindictive spark of cosmic satisfaction. Now, I searched my internal inventory and found absolutely nothing. No lingering rage, no bitter triumph, just calm, objective human perspective. "What did you advise her counsel, Rebecca?" I asked softly. "I informed them that you hold zero legal or moral obligation to entertain her request," Rebecca stated firmly. However, her attorney indicated she sounded deeply frightened, profoundly isolated, and entirely contrite. "I told them I would transmit the request for your independent evaluation." I looked across the kitchen island at Andrew. He offered a slight, non-directional nod, communicating complete support regardless of my strategic path. I thought about Leo loitering outside the Chelsea Gallery doors in the rain. I thought about the thriving, brilliant women writing code inside Phoenix Collective. I thought about the surgical scar running across my ribcage, which no longer registered as a site of historical trauma, but simply as permanent physical geography. The heavy, sharp-edged stones of resentment that had weighed down my stomach during that long car ride from JFK were completely gone. "Contact her counsel, Rebecca," I instructed clearly. "Confirm that I will visit the East 74th Street residence this Sunday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Allocate exactly 45 minutes for the schedule." A brief beat of respectful silence passed over the line. "Understood, Serafina. I will execute the confirmation immediately." The call ended. I leaned back in my bar stool, looking out through the glass doors at the sun-washed terrace, where early spring olive trees were actively blooming in cedar planters. "Why did you agree to the meeting?" Andrew inquired softly, stepping around the island to rest his hip against the counter beside me. "Because the furnace inside me is operating at maximum efficiency," I replied, looking up at him with a serene, unclouded smile. "And I have zero interest in burning additional fuel to maintain an anger towards someone who is currently freezing in the dark." 1 full year unfolded with breathtaking corporate acceleration. Time was no longer measured by the slow, painful cadence of emotional recovery or legal maneuvers. It was measured entirely by creative output and structural expansion. Phoenix Collective's seed capital portfolio performed with exceptional metrics. 2 of our initial 10 technology startups executed highly lucrative acquisitions by Silicon Valley conglomerates within 12 months. Dr. Eris Thorne's biotechnology laboratory secured an oversubscribed Series B funding round valued at $90 million, entering advanced clinical Phase 2 trials for her targeted oncology therapeutics. My surgical scar was simply physical architecture beneath my silk blouses. It no longer served as a public conversation piece or a tabloid reference point. Within the corporate boardrooms and sovereign wealth funds that genuinely mattered across global finance, I was no longer framed as the betrayed society wife who survived a public scandal. I was Serafina West, Senior Managing Director and co-founder of West Vance Partners. Andrew had personally insisted on maintaining my maiden legal surname within the corporate rebranding. "It isn't a romantic concession, Sira," he had argued during boardroom restructuring. "It is objective historical reality. You built the intellectual architecture, This is our shared empire. And for the very first time in my professional existence, the word "our" didn't feel like a predatory drain on my energy. It felt like an exponential multiplier of force. The formal invitation to the Vanity Fair Academy Awards after-party arrived via courier at our West Village office, addressed explicitly to Serafina West and Andrew West. We weren't attending as decorative high society guests. We had served as executive financiers for an independent, female-directed documentary detailing corporate corruption in the pharmaceutical sector that had secured a formal Academy Award nomination. Our private chauffeur navigated the sleek black Maybach through the crawling bumper to traffic along Sunset Boulevard in Beverly Hills. Flashbulbs strobed relentlessly against the tinted glass. Andrew sat beside me wearing a bespoke midnight blue velvet tuxedo, his fingers resting casually over mine on the leather armrest. I wore a custom-engineered, floor-length architectural gown, crafted from liquid silver chainmail, sharp-edged, structural, and completely impenetrable. "Are you experiencing any operational anxiety regarding the Hollywood press corps?" Andrew asked softly, brushing a thumb across my knuckles. I looked out at the chaotic, glittering wall of cameras and industry elites lining the entrance pavilion. "Not even a fraction of a percent," I smiled. "I have already navigated far more hostile boardrooms in Manhattan." We stepped out of the Maybach onto the deep blue arrival carpet. An immediate, deafening roar of shouting photographers and clicking shutters hit us. "Serafina! Over here! Look to your left!" A syndicated entertainment correspondent called out over the barricade, thrusting a branded microphone forward. "Serafina, how does an executive transition from a highly publicized Manhattan matrimonial scandal to controlling major entertainment financing in under 24 months?" I paused smoothly on the carpet, turning to face the correspondent with effortless, radiant poise. "A scandal is simply an external event that happens to you," I replied clearly, my voice carrying over the press line with absolute authority. "Authentic authority is the infrastructure you deliberately construct afterward." I have always preferred focusing my time on construction. Andrew let out a warm, low laugh beside me, placing a supportive hand at the small of my back as we guided our way through the entrance doors. The narrative was entirely under my control. Inside the expansive, multi-tiered Beverly Hills estate, the environment was a hyper-exclusive ecosystem of A-list actors, studio chiefs, and global cultural icons. It was a space where financial power and creative influence intersected at absolute peak performance. 20 minutes into the event, while Andrew and I were conversing near the central champagne fountain with a legendary film director, I felt a familiar, jarring visual shift across the room. Standing 40 feet away near a secondary bar pavilion was Chloe Bennett. She looked uncharacteristically out of her element, wearing an overly revealing, heavily sequined gold dress that felt out of step with the sophisticated, architectural fashion dominating the room. Her honey blonde hair was bleached a shade too bright. Her laugh was pitched a decibel too loud. She was hanging aggressively onto the arm of an aging, B-list television producer who looked visibly distracted by younger actresses circulating past his field of vision. She looked like a decorative, peripheral ornament struggling to maintain relevance inside a production where she held no speaking lines. Her wandering eyes scanned the VIP circle and locked directly onto mine. For a single heartbeat, her expression contorted with a violent, swirling vortex of recognition, bitter envy, and instinctive territorial insecurity. She leaned up to whisper rapidly into the ear of the aging producer, who barely offered a dismissive nod before returning to his drink. Setting her jaw, she detached herself from his arm and began weaving her way directly through the crowd toward our position. Andrew's posture immediately stiffened beside me, his eyes tracking her approach. "Shall we relocate to the garden pavilion?" he murmured softly. "No," I replied, keeping my voice calm and perfectly modulated. "Let her approach. This represents the final sentence of her historical footnote. Let's read it and close the book." She arrived at the edge of our circle, engulfed in a heavy cloud of overly sweet synthetic perfume that clashed violently with the crisp ocean breeze drifting through the open terraces. "Serafina," Chloe purred, stretching her lips into a tight, strained approximation of a social smile. "Or should I formally address you as Serafina West now? Changing legal identities and corporate brands so rapidly. How remarkably adaptable of you." I turned slowly to face her, looking her up and down with the calm, mild detachment one might resume for an airline passenger, causing a minor boarding delay. "Good evening, Chloe," I replied smoothly. "You appear highly visible tonight." I allowed my gaze to drift casually across the crowded room toward the B-list producer she had arrived with, who was currently buying a drink for a 22-year-old model. How are your commercial real estate ventures proceeding in Manhattan? Did you ever manage to secure alternative retail space for your gallery? The strategic strike landed with surgical precision. The Chelsea Gallery had never opened. Following my acquisition of the real estate, her commercial lease had been formally terminated, leaving her without a business footprint in New York. The forced smile vanished from her face, her jaw clenching tightly. I pivoted my professional focus, she snapped coldly. I currently provide private art advisory services to elite collectors out here in Los Angeles. Of course you do, I remarked, injecting just enough polite corporate boredom into my inflection to make the words sting far deeper than an outright insult. I shifted my physical alignment slightly toward the film director, standing beside us, completely cutting her out of the visual conversational circle. Andrew, didn't the cinematographer for our project arrive in the screening room? I would love to congratulate her on the nomination. It was the absolute, definitive execution of social dismissal, pure, unadulterated irrelevance. No dramatic argument, no thrown drinks, no raised voices, simply reducing her presence to zero operational significance. Raw, impotent fury flashed across Chloe's eyes, but she possessed no ammunition to fire. She had no financial standing, no social leverage, and no emotional anchor in my world. She stood completely frozen for 3 awkward seconds, realizing she had walked into a high-voltage arena completely unarmed, before turning sharply on her heel and disappearing back into the anonymous Hollywood crowd. Andrew guided me gently toward the perimeter terrace, overlooking the glittering lights of the Los Angeles basin. That, he murmured warmly against my ear, was absolute executive precision. I lifted my glass of vintage champagne, taking a slow, celebratory sip. Emotional energy is finite capital, Andrew. I have officially ceased allocating a single microcurrency unit to non-performing assets. By 1 o'clock in the morning, Andrew quietly guided me away from the thumping music of the main ballroom, down a secluded, jasmine-scented garden walkway leading toward the private estate exit. The chaos of the party faded into a distant, ambient hum. The Beverly Hills night air was cool, crisp, and completely clear beneath the stars. Our security detail stood waiting near the idling Maybach, but Andrew raised a hand, signaling the driver to wait for 5 minutes. We stood alone beneath a sprawling, centuries-old eucalyptus tree on the edge of the terrace. Andrew turned to face me fully, taking both of my hands into his. In the soft landscape lighting, every trace of the high-powered financial negotiator dropped away, leaving the grounded, intensely devoted man I had fallen deeply in love with. Over the past 24 months, Serafina, he said softly, his voice thick with genuine, unfiltered emotion, I have watched you systematically dismantle a toxic past and construct an unprecedented future with a degree of grace and structural brilliance that genuinely takes my breath away. You took profound betrayal and converted it into global empowerment. He stepped close enough that I could feel the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest against mine. I told you 6 months ago that I wanted to stand beside your fire. But the truth is, I fell deeply, irreversibly in love with the architect who controls that flame. My breath hitched slightly in my throat. The ambient sounds of the city completely vanished. He reached into the inner silk breast pocket of his velvet tuxedo jacket. He didn't produce a standard jeweler's ring box. Instead, he withdrew a folded, heavy-stock architectural blueprint document and placed it gently into my hands. I carefully unfolded the thick paper beneath the terrace lights. It was a highly detailed, professionally rendered architectural site plan for a sprawling, modern private residential compound located on a cliffside plot overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Malibu. At the bottom of the schematic, printed in crisp engineering font, read the title, The West Vance Residence. Master Structural Plan, Version 1. I scanned the annotated interior rooms. Primary Corporate Suite, Sarah. Primary Corporate Suite, Andrew. Shared Central Library and Strategy Boardroom. Debate, highly encouraged. Guest wings for portfolio founders. And right at the structural dead center of the main residential living atrium sat a massive, circular sunken fire pit labeled simply, The Furnace. Hot, joyful tears blurred my vision instantly. I looked up from the blueprint, meeting Andrew's intense, shining gaze. I am not submitting a formal marriage proposal to you tonight, Serafina, Andrew murmured softly, resting his hands gently on my hips. I am submitting a formal application to act as your co-architect for the remainder of our natural lives. I want to build this physical sanctuary with you. I want to populate those rooms with our shared debates, our late-night financial models, and our future family. I want to be the permanent home base you return to every single time you finish conquering the outside world. He wasn't attempting to rescue me. He wasn't attempting to own me. He was offering an absolute, unbreakable structural partnership built upon total mutual respect and boundless love. Your application is formally approved. Andrew, I whispered, my voice breaking with pure happiness. Subject to immediate, permanent execution. He let out a brilliant, genuine laugh, pulling me tight against his chest and lowering his mouth to capture mine in a slow, deeply passionate kiss that carried absolute permanence. The silver chainmail of my gown pressed flush against the velvet of his tuxedo jacket. There was zero hesitation, zero historical fear, and zero lingering shadow between us. An hour later, inside the quiet, fire-lit master suite of our Beverly Hills hotel, Andrew stood pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water at the wet bar, while I sat curled up on the plush sofa, tracing the detailed lines of the Malibu architectural blueprint spread across the coffee table. My iPhone chimed softly on the side console. A push notification alert from the Wall Street Journal breaking news desk. WSJ Morning Briefing. How venture capitalist Serafina West constructed a multi-million-dollar tech incubator empire, following a high-profile matrimonial dissolution. I clicked open the digital link, scanning the glowing paragraphs detailing our portfolio acquisitions, our Series A expansions, and the structural dominance of Phoenix Collective. At the absolute bottom of the article, buried deep within a historical background paragraph, sat a single, final sentence. Leonardo Vance, former managing partner of the now-defunct Vance Capital, remains permanently barred from the securities industry following his 2024 federal consent decree. I stared at the name for 2 seconds. It registered no emotional spike, no anger, no sorrow, no lingering vindication. It was simply an inactive data point on a closed ledger. I pressed the side button, extinguishing the screen completely, and tossed the phone face down onto the console. Is everything all right? Andrew asked, walking over to hand me a crystal glass, sitting down close beside me on the sofa so our knees touched. I looked at the brilliant, steady man sitting beside me, then down at the master blueprint of the future we were actively engineering together. Everything is extraordinary, I smiled, leaning my head securely against his shoulder as his arm wrapped warmly around my waist. We are entirely on schedule. The absolute victory hadn't been secured inside high society ballrooms, courtrooms, or tabloid headlines. It was right here in the quiet, unshakable freedom of a clean slate, and in the arms of the man who stood beside me, fully prepared to help me build an empire out of the fire.